Here we go!
Welcome to the Nintendo PowerZone. We are a videocast/podcast dedicated to bringing you the best Nintendo-related topics. As always, I'm your host, Nice One, and joining me today is my co-host, Blues. Welcome back to the show, man.
Hey, good to be back as always.
Sure that. Well, we have an interesting show because it's not often that we discuss, the other primary console manufacturers, but today's topic is one that we've been wanting to discuss for a little bit. Today's show, we're going to discuss the next generation of consoles, aka Gen 9, and what Nintendo and the Switch need to do in order to stay relevant in the wake of these new systems. But before we can do that, we got to hop straight into the powered up news. So,
of course, yeah.
With that being said, we've got a few stories, not major stories, but it's kind of been a slow news week with the exception of like one major reveal. But let's go ahead and start off here. A Nintendo patent leaked that shows a standalone Nintendo Switch Joy-Con. This is interesting because it's like, for what purpose would you actually need a standalone Joy-Con for? The only thing I can actually think of is this is going to be marketed to people who have Nintendo Switch Lites.
That's what I was thinking, yeah.
Aside from that, I can't think of a whole lot of other reasons for Nintendo to patent it. Now, what's interesting is the general shape of this standalone Joy-Con. It's kind of nice. It's, nice little oval. Everything is where it's supposed to be as far as like buttons are concerned. It kind of looks like a full controller because
it looks more complete compared to the halvesies of the Joy-Con.
Exactly. Like when you look at a Joy-Con, it's like that cutoff. Now, the only thing I cannot see in this standalone Joy-Con are the SL and the SR buttons. I don't know how those are going to work, and those would be the shoulder buttons when you're playing horizontally.
That is true. Because I would imagine that for some reason they expect you to have two of these, but the patent itself has them where it looks like it's just one Joy-Con. When you purchase it, it's going to be one Joy-Con and it's going to work as one Joy-Con, which for specifically Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, that's great, but like every other Switch game, unless you have those SL and SR buttons, you're kind of missing out on some things. Or if you can't pair it with another standalone Joy-Con, once again, you're kind of missing out on some things. So,
I mean, ideally, you're not really playing with half a controller, in a horizontal mode. Anyway, I mean, that's typically like if you're on the go and you really want to get in like that Mario Kart race. Be the only reason I've ever played, Mario any game with the detached Joy-Cons. It's interesting though. So yeah, I assume that these would come in packs of 2 still in order to compensate for the fact that functionality-wise, you do not have access to all the buttons that are necessary to play any video games. It's an interesting patent. The problem with patents is, as cool as it is to see them, we don't know which patents Nintendo will actually use. This could just be here so that Nintendo actually has a patent for a standalone Joy-Con.
So if someone else comes along and wants to make one, they can't.
They can't, exactly. Not without paying some kind of royalty.
Yeah. As well as just, we might see the technologies within this be used later on in the line, which is just a simple Joy-Con, probably not. But something like the Wii heartbeat monitor, right? That was something that was patented, never actually came about because why would it, right? But we see it being used with like the IR camera in the Joy-Cons and similar functionalities that Nintendo's put to pretty good use. So,
this would be a great pack-in with like a new bundle of Ring Fit.
Just to have no IR camera in the standalone Joy-Con though.
No. But but this is a patent, so we could also see, different alterations of this design.
Speaking of Ring Fit, I guess, just in general, this Joy-Con would also not be compatible with the majority of Switch like Joy-Con inserts and accessories. You can't slide this into the Ring and Ring Fit. The Switch steering wheels you buy from Mario Kart probably don't support this either. So
yeah, just because the general shape of this standalone Joy-Con not being a half, being kind of a whole controller. What I would hope though is that, like, looking at this patent, that the purpose of a redesign at all is to fix the horrible drifting issues that the Nintendo Switch Joy-Cons have in general. But you never know. Nintendo seems to be adamant on not actually correcting that, or based on the way that the controller is actually built, it might not be something that they can fix fairly easily.
It is a manufacturing problem, I believe, right? So I'd imagine that the fact that it comes from manufacturing and they haven't fixed it yet, if they haven't fixed it within like the Switch Lite and things, that it's not going to get fixed. You'd see a revision like this and you'd hope it would, but I honestly don't. I think it's just too far gone for them to fix it.
Well, I mean, yeah, we're now 3 years into the Switch, and it's still a persistent problem within this, system's lifespan.
Like, I'm with you. I want it to be fixed, but I doubt they're to do it.
Again, I think this is cool just because I always like looking at Nintendo patents. I like to see what Nintendo does. Because sometimes they use these things, and sometimes they just exist for Nintendo to purely have the concept. And in that case, that's fine too. Because protect what you create at all costs.
Yeah.
And I wonder if this will help them at all in the upcoming litigation against GameWise. Just showing like, hey, look, we have other things. It's not just detachable, a detachable controller. Now we have a standalone version of the controller. Blah blah blah. I mean, it is cool. But apparently, this was filed back in May of 2018. So this has been pretty much in the works for a while. So the fact that we're just now seeing that this is getting patented kind of shows that like Nintendo didn't really want to use this right away, because they could have still brought this to market patent pending.
Yeah, for sure.
They chose not to. But again, it's a cool little tidbit, and I like seeing stuff like this. Like it when Nintendo like gives us like a peek at, I like seeing how the sausage is made sometimes. You know what I'm saying?
I mean, when it's Nintendo patents, sure. I don't actually like to see what goes in my sausage. I think ignorance is bliss there, but I understand what you're saying. Yes.
True that. All right, but with that said, I think we can go ahead and move into our next story. I'm telling you, these are different types of stories, just because not a whole lot of stuff came out. But last week we did the Super Mario Nintendo Direct conversation, so we have a little bit more news in reference to that, and that's some altered and updated control schemes for these games. So first off, Super Mario 64 will not be compatible with the GameCube controller, which is really weird, considering the GameCube controller is the closest controller to the Nintendo 64 style controller. It would have been, I don't know if anybody's truly clamoring for this, but it is news that we're going to go ahead and share with you. What is interesting though is the buttons for Super Mario Galaxy have been reworked. So for those who have never played Super Mario Galaxy, shame on you, first off. And second off, Super Mario Galaxy had waggle controls with the Nintendo Wii Remote. So basically you would wag your controller to make Mario do his spin maneuver, or you'd point the Joy-Con in order to pick up the star bits. And with one-to-one motion, that worked really well. And that also allowed for some two-player functionality so that the second player could collect your star bits for you, adding to your overall star bit count. But in this remake, there is Pro Control support. So Pro Controls, some of them don't have motion control if you bought a third party or a wired version. Some of them do if you bought an official one, or the Power A one. So what they did was they mapped the spin button, the spin move, to the B button, which is nice. It will make for... I wasn't a huge fan of waggling the controller to do the spin move. I only did it because that's the control method of that game. Happy to see it's actually fixed to a button. Makes this a whole lot easier. But this isn't the first time Nintendo has fixed that spin maneuver to a button. 2 years ago, a NVIDIA Shield device that is exclusive to China got some ports of GameCube and Wii titles. And within those Wii titles, they got Mario Galaxy and Mario Galaxy 2. And on the NVIDIA Shield port, they were also mapped, to that, on that device, they were mapped to the X button. So this isn't the first time, which I assume would be in the same position as the B button is on this. I don't know which specific NVIDIA Shield this game came out for, but it is interesting to note that fixing the spin maneuver to a button is not exclusive to this specific port of Super Mario Galaxy.
For sure, yeah. This is something, the spin maneuver never really had to be put onto the waggle controls. They always could have been mapped to the button the same way that we can throw Cappy with just the button press, right?
Exactly.
The big, I never found the waggling in Mario Galaxy to be too intrusive to it, because it's just a quick, simple thing. It's literally just the same as you would just press a button. You're just using your whole wrist to do it, right?
More often than not, I would mostly forget to collect the star bits.
Yeah, I didn't quite understand them as a dumb little child. So,
as an adult, because I was an adult when that game came out, I still just totally forget that these star bits are something that are collectible via the Wii remote. Something else that's interesting is that when you're playing in tabletop mode, the touchscreen is going to be able to function as your ability to collect star bits, since if you're playing in handheld mode, you wouldn't have access to those proper motion controls because you're using your Joy-Cons as a fixed controller. So being able to use your finger to go ahead and collect the star bits, that's interesting, but that means you're holding the system in one hand.
Yeah, and if you're maybe in a tight boss battle or something, or just an intense level, you need to make a jump, but your hand was collecting star bits, you might not be able to hit that jump or that spin in time.
And not that Mario Galaxy is a intensely hard or difficult Mario game. It's not. It's just that some of those boss fights can be nerve-wracking. Aside from that, two-player functionality will remain the same functionally as it did on the Wii. So the second player will be using motion controls to gather, pointer controls to gather star bits. Good luck finding a second player who wants to do that, because literally, I have always thought that is the worst second player functionality in video game history.
Cappy's a pretty good little brother mode, though. Cappy was great. Cappy just kind of breaks Mario Odyssey wide open, though.
You get way too much power.
Yeah.
Aside from that, there's not a whole lot of other stuff concerning Super Mario 3D All-Stars, other than the fact that it is now the second best-selling game via Amazon in 2020, which is kind of big news.
Well, I still have a question regarding the controls of Super Mario 3D All-Stars. What am I going to do if I don't have pressure-sensitive triggers for Sunshine? That's vitally important to the experience.
Then I don't know what... Yeah, these are digital controls, aren't they? Not analog.
Yeah, the Switch Pro control. None of the Switch controllers support the pressure-sensitive triggers, so I can't just trickle flood out.
Don't know. Maybe Nintendo's going to have to address that at some point.
They don't need to, but it's sacrilege at the same time.
Well, again, little story, not a whole lot of major things to talk about here, but I know a lot of people are excited about 3D All-Stars. I mean, as many people who are upset that it's not proper, full-on remakes instead of slightly remastered ports. People are still excited, considering it's second best-selling game on Amazon for 2020. That's kind of says a lot. So
it sells. It's Mario.
People should be highly excited about this. Moving on, though, I want to jump into our next story, because this one makes me sad. It makes me very, very sad. No More Heroes 3 has been officially delayed to 2021. So, guys, we will not be getting our Travis touchdown fix this year. Add this to the list of bullshit that has happened in 2020. Suda51 did go ahead and put out a statement. We're going to go ahead and read that for you guys right now. If we can get it pulled up. My tablet decides it wants to be super slow right now. Here we go. This is Goichi Suda from Grasshopper Manufacturer with an announcement regarding the postponement of the release of No More Heroes 3. Reading through the comments of fans on social media, we know 2020 has been a very tough period for many of you. To everyone who has been waiting for further news and release date confirmation ever since the reveal of the trailer for No More Heroes 3 at the Tokyo Game Awards at the end of 2019, I would like the Game Awards at the end of 2019. I would like to offer my sincerest apologies. All staff members at Grasshopper have been working as hard as possible on developing the game in hopes of releasing it in 2020. But the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic have unfortunately proven to be a real body blow to our schedule, causing unforeseen delays in development. Now that we have managed to get back on our feet with development, we've decided to focus on prioritizing quality and to therefore push back the final release date. Very sorry once again. We hope that everyone who has been waiting patiently for No More Heroes 3 can understand and accept this decision, and we will continue to put every effort into the title's development as we shoot for a 2021 release date. In other and hopefully better news, we are extremely pleased to announce that Derek Robertson of The Boys fame, and who I am personally a huge fan of, will be joining the project to provide illustrations for the game. We'll be posting some original illustrations, so please be sure to check them out. Please stay tuned for key art from Derek himself, as well as further announcements and news regarding No More Heroes 3. Signed, Suda51, No More Heroes 3 director. So, this is a body blow to Grasshopper, but this is a huge body blow to the fan base. It's been a while since we had a No More Heroes game. Been a while, like a proper. We did get the Travis Strikes Again, which is okay, but not. It didn't feel like a real No More Heroes game because it wasn't.
It was just a bad game in general, too. The only thing it was No More Heroes, so you kind of had to, right?
It existed, and,
when you're starved for No More Heroes content, you take what you can get, right?
The same thing is like, do you really get mad when Nintendo drops a weird Metroid game when you haven't had a Metroid game in like 12 years? Like, you get upset, but you see the sales numbers for the game, and it ends up doing like pretty well. It is what it is. I mean, this sucks, man. I've been really wanting to revisit this franchise for a while now, and I keep, Suda's been saying for a while now that he also wants to figure out a way to get the original 2 games on the Nintendo Switch, which would be fantastic. It'd be nice to revisit those titles right before hopping into a 3rd game.
For sure, yeah.
This sucks for me. Like, you guys have seen how I've reacted on this channel anytime they've announced anything related to No More Heroes. I treat this as like one of those franchises that's as big as like Final Fantasy VII. Like, it gets the same kind of reaction out of me just because Travis Touchdown is such a fucking badass while being an asshole at the same fucking time. So it's like, this franchise is fun and it's stupid, but it's stupid in ways that like I can completely get behind.
For sure, yeah. But I will say that as far as you never want to hear that a great game is being delayed. That's just, no one ever wants to hear that. But I feel like Suda51 probably has made the best delay statement I've heard in a very long time.
Agreed. Yeah, this isn't like some bullshit. This goes back to that transparency thing we were talking about last year when they delayed Metroid Prime 4. Like, I am more willing to accept delays and issues when companies are upfront. Look at how much backlash Nintendo caught for Breath of the Wild, right? A game that they announced 4 or 5 years before it actually came out, that had a year of development time before the announcement of it. So a 6-year wait between core Zelda titles, and the last delay coming so that they could make the Switch port compatible for launch date, for the launch date of the Switch. That went terribly for Nintendo. There was a lot of backlash to it, but you have to understand, from a marketing and financial standpoint, made a whole lot of sense for Nintendo to do that. The problem was the lack of transparency. We got a lot of transparency when they decided to tell us that Metroid Prime 4 was fucked up, that they had to start from the beginning. And
still not seen anything since then.
True.
It's just upsetting.
But, and it's kind of weird because, there have been a lot of job listings for Retro Studios, specifically like with reference to working on Metroid Prime 4. It makes me wonder what's happening at Retro. It is what it is. Hopefully Nintendo will put out a statement, but yeah, the transparency that Goichi Suda put out here was absolutely fantastic. You can't really fault him for that. Like, this is a pretty good statement. And again, as much as it sucks, I am willing to accept the weight. And hopefully, what this does is it makes No More Heroes 3 a better game.
For sure, yeah. Especially since Grasshopper and Studio 51 are part of a very small team. They're still considered indie, right? They're still under an indie label,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
So they're still fairly small, despite the repertoire of Studio 51. His legacy is pretty high.
I mean, Killer 7, like
Mhm.
one of the best games on the PS2. You can't really. I don't know a lot of people who have played that game that don't like it. No More Heroes, more of a niche style like franchise. Like, it had being one of the few M-rated games on the Nintendo Wii already made it like a niche game.
Out.
And then just the fact that it's so oddball and so vulgar that it doesn't even have the same kind of mass appeal that a game like Killer 7 had. It is niche all the way. So, I mean, for me, it worked. Like, I loved it. I love the aesthetics. I love the story, like the nonsensical story, because it is really nonsensical if you actually pay attention to it.
Is definitely his claim to fame, I would say. He doesn't make a whole lot of highly known games, but when he makes a hit, and then sometimes he makes like Lollipop Chainsaw, and we don't really talk about it, but like he
Lollipop Chainsaw on the Xbox. Who gives a I mean, like, it's not like his studio doesn't have. I mean, they also had that kind of flop, Daemon Ex Machina. Like, a lot of people who work on No More Heroes worked on that game, and that didn't bode too well. So this is kind of like, and then again, Travis Strikes Back had issues. This is kind of like proof of whether or not Suda51 can
still has it.
Will maintain his relevance at this point, because we have to question whether or not, like, this guy just, is he past his prime? Is he moving into like that Martin Scorsese territory where the movies aren't actually good, but people will say they're good? I'm talking about you, Irishman. You were trash. One of the worst movies I've ever seen.
Well,
I hate Martin Scorsese. I'm just straight up. I find
No More Heroes 3, unfortunately, has been delayed. It's understandable. 2020 is tough. They're a small studio, but they're handling it well, and I still think that this was the right call. I'd much rather have a good No More Heroes than Travis Strikes Again, because they rushed it when they weren't ready for the pandemic,
Yeah, I mean, and this is cool. I mean, it's one of the. I know this isn't. I believe this isn't a Switch exclusive, but I do think it is a Switch timed exclusive, similar to how the other games in the franchise were. But it is what it is. Hopefully, with this delay, maybe Goichi Suda or Suda51 will decide that there needs to be some kind of fixture in the No More Heroes franchise and get somebody to work on these ports for us, man. Let's get the first two like in a bundle on the Nintendo Switch, because I will happily replay those games.
For sure, yeah.
All right. With that said, we can move on to a story that I am elated to talk to you guys about. We finally have a release date for the Console Wars documentary. Console Wars was a fantastic book by a friend of the show, Blake J. Harris. We've had him on this show twice to discuss this book and his last book, The History of the Future, the story of Oculus. Blake's book might be the definitive book on that era of gaming. Like, there's not a whole lot of like content about the 90s video game history, but Blake's book does a lot to fill in the gaps of things that we didn't know as children. Well, you as fetus.
Thanks. Yeah.
Me as a small youth. It's a great book. I have actually read that book 7 times in the 6 years that it's been out. Like, I've consumed this book left and right because it's a great read. 2, it tells a fantastic story of true life events. And 3, it's a great nostalgia trip for me. So when we interviewed Blake, he did give us the information that Console Wars was to be exclusive to CBS All Access. That hasn't changed. It's still going to be on that streaming platform. So I guess the best news is that there is a free trial for CBS All Access if you want to start this documentary. I've been waiting for this documentary to come out so that I could begin my subscription to CBS All Access.
That's what I've been doing too, yeah.
And what's great about it is they dropped a trailer alongside the announcement, and the trailer, it's pretty high quality trailer. We have some like old school video game commercials embedded into the video as B-roll, which looked really fantastic because it looked like they did a little bit of a remastering to some of these like old, because you can find a lot of this content on YouTube, right? If you want to go ahead and search up 90s, video game commercials, it's really easy to do. And I've done that on numerous occasions just to have like a nostalgia trip.
We found old cereal commercials quite a few times, I feel like, on this show specifically.
Oh, yeah. Oh, well, and especially for our April Fool's Day prank, the Nintendo, the cereal PowerZone. I found a Pop-Tarts commercial. A Corn Pops commercial with Paul Walker in it.
And we brought out the commercials for the NES cereal back when the Mario cereal came out. You can find some crazy old commercials just archived on the internet. So
exactly, but they won't always be in the best quality. It looks like they were able to
terrible quality.
Looks like what they were able to do here was find some great quality. There's also clips from news stories that were done on like local news and national news. So there's a whole lot of stuff to look forward to. Plus, we get to see the interviews that were conducted, not just for the documentary, because what Blake was telling us during that last episode was that the documentary was shot pretty much at the same time that he was writing the book. So a lot of this footage that we're seeing is like the visual transcript of those interviews that he was, doing for the book. This is cool. The trailer looked great. And it's nice. If you've read the book, you're introduced to a bevy of characters that work for Sega and Nintendo. It is nice to put faces to these people and hear their voice. Because I've also listened to the audiobook of this, and while I do believe that the Fred Berman, who did the audiobook, did a fantastic job narrating and giving every character a voice, it's nice to hear and see these people, and I am really excited. So this will be premiering on September 23rd, so it's right around the corner. CBS All Access. Guys, I implore you, watch this documentary. It is good. The only thing I feel might hinder the performance of this documentary is the proximity of its release to High Score on Netflix.
Yeah,
I've been watching that. I'm on episode 3 right now. It's a fairly decent documentary. I don't take a whole lot of issue with it. A lot of the information is a lot of stuff that a hardcore gamer would know. Yeah. Some of it isn't.
Yeah. So I've personally finished High Score, and I think the big appeal of Console Wars compared to High Score is that in High Score we only really focus on the Console Wars for one episode. I think that's either episode 2 or 3.
It's episode 2.
Yeah. So where High Score is more so about, I guess, a lot of legacy behind a lot of the major advents of the gaming rise. We start with Space Invaders. We then move on to the Console Wars, and it's much more about like isolated events of just the biggest IPs and studios and things like that coming into existence. Whereas Console Wars within the book really, really goes in depth between this rivalry between Nintendo and Sega.
Well, that's the problem I have with most video game documentaries. Most documentaries that tackle video games always do it in the broad approach, right? They always want to talk about all of video game history. All of video game history is 40-something years of history. So and a lot of it is poorly documented history, right?
Don't preserve it. Preservation of video games is garbo.
Well, it's almost non-existent. It's only something that it's a concept that really only manifested itself within the last 10 years, right?
Yeah.
Right. If you look at it, like how many video game studios, they grow, they move from one building to the next, and instead of taking these design documents and storing them away, or taking these original boards and storing them in a proper warehouse facility, they just trash these things, or they put them for sale, or they go on auction. There is a Nintendo PlayStation, one in the world that we know exists, that is in the hands of a personal collector, because these weren't properly preserved, because a Sony employee was allowed to take the system from its resting place at Sony, because there's just no regard for preservation. But again,
it's found in an attic I guess almost a decade now at this point, right? But maybe only 5 years or so. But it was just found in an attic.
Yeah, exactly. So we're talking about, these documentaries that want to go very broad in the scope of like video game history, and the problem is like that history is poorly documented at best, right? If documented at all. So we get force-fed the same information from all these different types of documentaries. What I like are the documentaries that have central focus, like King of Kong. Like, it's a weird documentary because it's about like
Donkey Kong high scores.
Exactly. And the people who set them, and if I'm being honest, these people aren't ideal people to kind of want to emulate. Some of them are like really poorly, they're poorly off, or bad shit happens to them, and these high scores are what they cling to for some semblance of recognition, some semblance of immortality. Like it's almost kind of a sad thing to watch when you watch that documentary. I ended up watching that documentary and feeling bad for the people who are in it. Well, except for Billy Mitchell. But it is what it is. I mean, like, yeah, with Console Wars, what I loved about the book was its central focus. Console Wars is very specifically focused on a 5 to 6 year time period in a man's life. A man who had tremendous pull at a video game company. And seeing his journey, and then, getting a few side perspectives from the people who worked with him, the people that worked against him at, rival game companies, we get some cool little interesting details about like the why Mortal Kombat came out on multiple platforms at the same time. There's a whole lot of information in this book that I cannot wait to see in the documentary, because I want to hear these men speak on these subjects, because like at this point, like I've read that book so many times, these people are almost legendary, right? So, and just because, being a child of that era, these people were, behind the scenes. They didn't have, like, they weren't out there the way, they would be now, right? We look at like video game manufacturers, developers now. Reggie is a celebrity, right? Is it, or Cliff Blazinski, a celebrity? We look at these video game, people who are at the top, the upper echelon of video game development and marketing, and they're celebrities to us. In the 90s, who the fuck was Tom Kalinske to me? Nobody. Who the fuck? Like, I knew who Shigeru Miyamoto was back then, because who didn't? But did I understand the true like nature of his like scope at Nintendo? I didn't understand that until I was like in my mid-teens.
For sure,
right around the GameCube era. That's when I started to understood the type of like presence he had at Nintendo.
For sure, yeah. It wasn't for me coming up later in that I didn't really start seeing, understanding who these key figures were at minimum until maybe late Wii era, early Wii U, which once again would have been my teens, because it just wasn't like a thing I particularly cared about as someone who just consumed the media. I played Mario, that was great, but I didn't really understand or really care for what was going on with when they were making Mario. And it's just something that as a casual consumer, you just don't really think about. And that, I think, is one maybe why, well, not the only reason, but one of the many reasons why we don't really preserve the, history of video games, why we don't really care about it until we want to dive deeper in our later years. And, video games history, like you said, is only about 40 years in its entirety, right? So the people who came from your era, right, are just now saying, hey, we want to preserve this stuff. So it's going to help people like me and younger kids going forward but there was no one there before you to say, hey, we should preserve this stuff. I'm interested I want to look into it.
Well, if you look at it, Blake is a year and a half older than I am.
Mm-hmm.
And he's really kind of like the first to take a centralized focus on a specific era. Like,
yeah,
I've read other books and on stuff on things like Super Mario or Game On. Game On is a great book. The name of the author escapes me. He works for Wired and IGN. And Game On is a book that focuses very heavily on Japanese video game making, right? But it covers, again, very broad scope. It covers Japanese video game development through the eras of Japanese video game development. So there's a very big section on Final Fantasy, the franchise as a whole, and how it got started, the necessity of Final Fantasy to Square Enix and whatnot. But again, broad focus. Great book. I'm not saying that the book isn't good. It's just one of these large focus things. What's cool about Game On, though, it was written as a college thesis and it ended up being published as a full-on, book. And it is a great book. And I implore you to look up Game On because it's a fantastic read. It does have a little bit of a lull somewhere in the middle when they're talking about video game music. But aside from that, still a great read. But with Blake's book, it's almost, if you've read the book, The Accidental Billionaires, which is the story of Facebook, Blake's book is Console Wars is written in a similar fashion to that, where he gets to somewhat create the dialogue for the people who are in the book, because as Blake told me once, there's no way anybody's going to remember exactly what they said at every moment in their life. So what my job was to give these people a voice and make them sound as much like the people that they actually are as I possibly could, right? And I think he did a good job of that. And now with the documentary, you'll get to hear these people telling their firsthand accounts of this era. And man, as somebody who grew up during this era, absolutely fantastic time, because those console wars really were big in children's lives. Like, can't tell you how many schoolyard arguments people would have over which was the better company, Sega or Nintendo. I know these arguments probably still exist today, but the playing field is much different, right? The battlegrounds are Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, other social media platforms, and a lot of it is just a cacophony of angry people.
They're echo chambers, yeah.
Exactly. So you're not getting like a true feel, like it's harder to make your own, get your own understanding of what you like better if you consume nothing but the social media BS that comes out. I'm not trying to trash social media because social media has its value. I'm just saying the arguments that we had on the playground over these things were much more impactful in my life than the stuff that I see on social media. Anyway, September 23rd, CBS All Access. Get your memberships, sign up. Let's start watching this documentary, because I'm pretty much guaranteeing this is going to be a dope-ass documentary. I do actually want to see if we can get Blake back on the show to talk about the documentary after it's premiered. Just because I really want to talk about I want to talk specifics about the documentary that we just couldn't talk about on the first two interviews. So I'll do my best to get him back on. I can't make any promises, guys. Moving on, though. So on Monday of this week, Nintendo shadow dropped a brand new trailer for a game that I don't think anybody expected or wanted or asked for. I'm not saying we don't want it now. I'm just saying I don't think anybody wanted it upon its reveal.
I'm pretty sure there was definitely like a very, very niche group of super fans specifically for this game. There definitely were.
There has to have been, but like, I don't know. I don't think anybody was clamoring for it. But anyway, The Legend of Zelda, Hyrule Warriors, Age of Calamity, a prequel to Breath of the Wild that will tell the canon events of the 100 years preceding Breath of the Wild. So this is pretty interesting in a couple of ways. I know that at the end of the day, this is a Dynasty Warriors game. It's a Musou game. I'm not a huge fan of this genre. It kind of peaked in the mid-aughts and hasn't gotten a whole lot better in my opinion. I know that some of the Nintendo exclusive ones have been interesting for a lot of people, but it is what it is. It's 1 versus 1,000, right? That's what it is. But what's interesting about this one is the experimental nature of this one. Because this is kind of really the first time that a third party gets to depict the events of canon storylines, right? Now, we have the Oracle games for the Game Boy Color, the Oracle of Ages and Oracle of Seasons that were made by Capcom, and they are part of the actual Zelda timeline. They do tell canon stories to the timeline, but this is a prequel to a very popular game whose story is told in fragmentation, right? So if you play Breath of the Wild, you can find all the memories, some of the memories, or none of the memories if that's how you want to play, right?
Yeah. So this game is actually going to be very nice for me because I only got like 1 or 2 memories. I know for a fact one of them was just by complete accident. I definitely played Breath of the Wild much more casually than a lot of people did. By the end of it, I hardly knew the controls. I'm going to be honest. I cleared the Divine Beasts. I did like maybe 60 to 80 of the shrines, and I got like a couple hundred Korok seeds, and I was like, no, all right, I'm good. I beat it.
Honestly, I sought the memories. I scoured as much of the map as humanly possible to find the memories, and then when I was missing about 3 of them, I was like, strategy guide. I'm finding these damn memories.
Yeah.
I'm not playing. I like how one of the last one I found is the first one that you should be able to find in the Great Plains. I was like, damn it. Whatever. Yeah, so as far as story content is concerned, like in terms of Breath of the Wild, you don't have to find any of it. And it doesn't hurt the game. They did it that way. You can tell the reason for telling the story in a fragmented way was to give the players freedom, right? To give them the game is an open air concept for Nintendo. It's kind of like their first foray into an open world style game of their own. In order to make it so that the players could get the most out of it, is to fragment the story, right? There's only really one story element or a couple that are forced upon you, and that's meeting Sidon, the beginning of the game, and the end of the game. Those are really the only story elements that are forced upon the player, right? And you can tell that meeting Sidon is kind of like the first thing you're supposed to do as far as your first interaction with the Divine Beast, because he takes you to it, essentially, and he is part of the primary combat of the Divine Beast.
Yeah.
But here we're getting this story that you didn't have to find in the primary game, and maybe more. I would imagine that there are more fleshed out story elements that we didn't get within Breath of the Wild, because again, fragmented story, being, Link, the goal is for Link to regain his lost memories in that game, but that's purely up to the player to decide. So I imagine that this game will be more filled with the story elements that are missing in between the fragmented memories that you do find.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of lost my train of thought. Anyway, yeah, I would just imagine that this game fills in as many of the blanks that it possibly can.
Yeah, I would imagine that's for sure what it's going to do. And as someone who, like I had mentioned, has not really done any of the memories, this is great for me because now I get to know what actually happened. But it also, I know I haven't seen a whole lot of the cutscenes from Breath of the Wild, but this looks just a little bit more visually impressive than the original game did.
I would imagine so, simply because it was purely developed for the Switch, whereas we know that Breath of the Wild was developed for the Wii U and got ported.
Mm-hmm. Now, one question I kind of have is, so we know that Breath of the Wild has a sequel coming, and there was a rumor at one point that it was going to be a trilogy, that Breath of the Wild was going to be a whole trilogy. Do we include this prequel as the official third game, or will there be a sequel after Breath of the Wild 2, do we think?
That's a good question. I didn't think about that. I do. It comes down to, despite the fact that this game will be telling canon storyline, does Nintendo treat it as it's actually canon? I mean,
true.
If Nintendo says this, while this is telling you the actual events in the way that we want them to be told, we don't have to include this in our canon.
True.
I would imagine, though, that this game gets officially added to the timeline right in front of Breath of the Wild. I don't see why Nintendo would ignore the importance of this game to that.
The only reason I could really think of, and it's a very, Koei Tecmo thing, is they add too many OCs. You get to play as Linkle and what's her name, Lana, and like if they add like too many just weird OCs, I could see it being not canon. I could also.
That's the other thing, though, right? Is in comparison to the first Hyrule Warriors, this has a fixed position, right? So the amount of characters that are accessible, much more limiting. So who do we have access to? So we'll have access to the Sheikah, at least one. Link, Zelda, and the 4 champions, right?
Well, it's the old champions, though.
Yeah, the original champions. Daruk, Rivali, Urbosa, and Mipha. Yes, thank you.
It's true, but what if you could also play as like the king? Or what if, Muso games typically also allow you to play as an enemy side and see things from their perspective? What if they create like an OC for the enemies that we never get to see originally? Or just like another behind the scenes good guy character that was like less important but was still there. You get to play as him. Tingle draws the maps, I don't know.
I could see them doing something like that, but either way, I guarantee you this has a much more fixed focus on the characters that we were already introduced to into the game. So yeah, I think 6 protagonists, like right out the gate, and then maybe DLC for the other characters. So we'll have Link, Link, Zelda, and the 4 champions will be your primary like day 1 characters.
Okay, that makes sense.
Be cool though, to play the champions as they fall. I know the DLC kind of did that, where you see but it's Link reliving how the champions fell within that DLC. It'll be much more interesting to actually play as the champions as they go down, fighting up the Calamity Ganon forms.
Because I think one of the crazy things, I guess, and this is someone who didn't collect the memories, so I might not know entirely, but they're going to spend like 25 chapters of this getting you attached to each and every champion, and you're gonna be like, oh, I hated Ravioli in the game, and you're like, no, Ravioli. And when he dies, and like you're gonna see like Hyrule Castle fall, and it's like, no, we were like, it's gonna spend time building you up just so you know it's gonna fall, and that's gonna suck.
Well, for me, honestly, the only champion that like really that I felt like I grew any attachment to was Urbosa. Just
Urbosa and Mipha were great. Yeah,
yeah, well, because I feel like Daruk is kind of an idiot, right?
I wouldn't know.
Rivali's an asshole,
Yeah, I do know that much.
and Mipha is, she's sweet, and Urbosa is motherly. So you build fonder connections to those characters than the other two. I don't think they have to go out of their way to make those two characters appealing. Maybe for Rivali, I think there's a little bit of work to be done, but a lot of people just like Rivali because he's a dick, right?
Yeah,
He is the guy who thinks that he's better than Link, that he should be the guy that wields the Master Sword. He should be the guy that defeats the Calamity.
Yeah, he's Bakugo.
Oh yeah, exactly.
He's just Bakugo.
So, but yeah, I mean, I'm having a hard time coming to terms with the fact that this is the route that Nintendo is choosing to tell a canon story. Again, the Oracle games aside, they aren't direct sequels to anything. They don't have a direct tie to a specific game, whereas this very specifically ties into Breath of the Wild. So I'm having a hard time rectifying that. It's like, is this really the way you want to do it with this style of game? Because again, it boils down to this is a Muso game, right? 1 versus 1,000. These games don't offer a whole lot of variety, and typically they don't have the best storylines. I guess because it's tied to Breath of the Wild, that inherently gives it a better story than we would normally get. But I don't think this is the best way to tell this story.
I personally, I'm in favor of it, strictly from a perspective, like a presentation perspective. Gameplay, I feel like, it's not going to be great because it's just very empty, like most Muso games are. But I really like the idea of just seeing these huge armies fight for Hyrule, like in the Breath of the Wild timeline specifically. Like, because if I was imagining the Breath of the Wild 100 years ago, I would have imagined it's just kind of like small armies and each led by the champion. So seeing these grand forces going at each other, I feel like is a much better way to portray the war and the fall of Hyrule. I personally think just from a presentation standpoint, I would prefer this rather than just like Breath of the Wild, but prequel.
True that. We'd like to formally welcome Jaden to today's show. How's it going, man? Any thoughts on Hyrule Warriors Calamity of Ages?
Yeah, my bad. I forgot. I thought for some reason I had more time. So, but beyond that, no, I think that it'll be good. I actually think that the Muso games, well, it depends on which ones you play, but I played quite a lot because they're one of my guilty pleasures. They're one of those games that I recognize isn't super deep. I recognize isn't like revolutionary in any way, shape, or form, but I enjoy it nonetheless.
They're really great to sort of relax too. Like you get this really nice dopamine rush of just after a long day of hard work, just mowing down enemies. It's
something nice and simple about that. But as such, I've played a lot of them, and I actually think they can do a good job of storytelling. It's a very Japanese way of storytelling, where even though you might know the ending, it's about everything that happens up until that point. It's kind of like in America, we see some movies that are fall from grace movies, where Better Call Saul. That's an example, right? You know that Saul is going to have a fall from grace, but how did he get there, right? And so that show is very much a case of like, well, let's explore the story of what happened there. And I think from all the various different samurai warrior games that I've played, I think this can actually be a really good way to tell this story, especially if the Calamity War is as big of a scale as it seems to imply. So I think it can be done really well.
Well, that brings us into the other problems with Musou style games specifically on Nintendo consoles. How's this gonna run? Hyrule Warriors had frame rate issues on the Wii U.
Mm-hmm.
It was abysmal on the 3DS.
Yeah.
It is more palatable on the Nintendo Switch. Still had its issues, and the same can be said for Fire Emblem Warriors. They have their frame rate issues because you're trying to bombard the screen with all these assets. Yeah. When you have all these things, you're bombarding the assets. The Switch, in and of itself, is a very small system. Yeah. You're pushing the hardware. It might, as much as you guys were talking up the fact that you really think that this should have thousands of enemies on the screen at once. I hope Koei Tecmo takes a step back, actually, limit it to like maybe 100 at a time. Like, be reasonable with the limitations of the hardware.
But I almost feel like you can get away with more enemies when you look at a Breath of the Wild sort of game, because compared to Fire Emblem Warriors and the original Hyrule Warriors, the Breath of the Wild art style is you're gonna be loading in a lot less polygons. I feel like, right?
Possibly.
Like a Bokoblin from Hyrule Warriors on Wii U is much more complex model than the Bokoblins in Breath of the Wild, right? I would imagine. I didn't design the character, but just looking at them, there's got to be more polygons in the previous ones than these ones.
I guess it depends on how true they are to the Breath of the Wild art style. As far as like, I do think this looks marginally better than Breath of the Wild. It's not like a huge step forward in the graphical capabilities of that game.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. I have this weird relationship with Koei Tecmo. Sometimes their games look stunning, and sometimes they don't.
Yeah.
And I find myself torn because the games that typically look good for Koei aren't the games that I typically enjoy.
Yeah.
The ones that look bad are the ones that I do enjoy from them. And this is one where we have a very fixed art style, right? Yeah. We are attached to the Breath of the Wild art style because of what it visually does for Zelda, transitioning it into a new era, and what it means just for the franchise as a whole, right?
Yeah.
So having this new art style being completely tied to it, they have to pay homage in the right way. What is cool, though, is that Nintendo is working with Koei Tecmo a lot more in depth than they've worked with them on previous Warriors games. They basically said, we kind of gave them carte blanche for Hyrule Warriors and Fire Emblem Warriors, but now we're working with them side by side. This is a co-publication.
And I guess it's worth mentioning that previously, the crossover Musou titles have brought in elements from the main games that they're based off of into the combat, some more so than others. Like, I look at Persona 5 Scramble, and that's looking like it's way, way better than Hyrule Warriors was, just in terms of the identity of that game, which having more identity to it is what's going to help these games feel much more enjoyable and fun compared to a standard Samurai Warriors or Dynasty Warriors game. Like, having a bit of puzzle solving was a nice change of pace in the original Hyrule Warriors. However, it wasn't really a whole lot of puzzle solving, and the little that they did have was very, very simple, right? But they talk about how since they designed that original game around the Zelda conventions, right, which would make that up, Breath of the Wild since broke all those conventions, and now they get to do a game with the broken conventions. And so I'm kind of wondering, will that be good? Because will they maybe take a more of that approach they're taking with Persona 5 Scramble as opposed to what they did with Fire Emblem Warriors and Hyrule Warriors?
I hope to see a more populated world in this game, but I also hope that this frees the Breath of the Wild universe from shrines. I didn't dislike the shrines. I did enjoy the majority of the shrines, but there were too many. They were just too many. I would like to not have to deal with shrines in this game. Before we move on, I do want to point out that Nintendo will be having a showcase for this on the 26th of September, and that's going to be at Tokyo Game Show, or the digital version of Tokyo Game Show. I don't know what they're actually doing with TGS this year, but they're going to be doing that. It's going to be 50 minutes of gameplay, and I would assume that they'll talk about the development of this game, how it came to be, what to expect, and graphically what this game is going to be capable of. Aside from that, I think we should go ahead and move on.
Well, let's give the people the release date. So this game is going to come out November 20th, 2020, which makes Nintendo's holiday lineup pretty packed all of a sudden. It went from the best game coming out this holiday season was Bakugan Champions of Vestroia, and now we have a new Hyrule Warriors. We got Super Mario 3D All-Stars coming out. We have Pikmin 3. Like we got stuff all of a sudden. Like in a matter of weeks, we went from Bakugan to this.
In Mario as well. Don't forget the big Mario announcement. That's a big one. But I mean, I'm just gonna say Bakugan's still gonna be top seller. It's the best one coming out.
For sure. I've already pre-ordered. I got my Bakugan already here.
I got your back loose. It's cool.
You guys. With that, let's go ahead and let's
live on twitch.tv/TheKingBlues.
Let's go ahead and move into our actual topic for today's episode. And this is one that we've been kind of wanting to discuss for a while. And this one is kind of important because the industry is changing. How does Nintendo and the Nintendo Switch stay relevant among the Gen 9 consoles? So Microsoft earlier in the week gave us some price point information and some technical specifications of the Xbox Series X and Xbox Series S, and they are coming in at what I believe most gamers would consider to be reasonably affordable, which I did not expect once they unveiled the Series X when I saw that massive dorm room refrigerator. And while we're still while we're still waiting this information to be given to us by Sony for the PS5, we do want to know a lot about the PlayStation 5's upcoming roster of games. Enough to know that Nintendo will once again be behind the curve in terms of just raw power and possibly content. So what does Nintendo need to do in order for the Switch to maintain its relevancy going forward? I want to start by talking about Microsoft and the specs, the price point, the launch date. Blues, do you have this open?
No, I probably should. Hold on.
I'm trying to. Yeah. I'm using my tablet as a second screen, and it's actually kind of trying. All right.
There we go. That's a nice one. PC Gamer has a good one.
Xbox Series S is recently announced. It's the smallest Xbox ever, and it's all digital and doesn't have 4K.
Weird, right?
I mean, it's pretty affordable at that.
Yeah, at $299. What putting it in direct competition with the Nintendo Switch, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Plus, I'm much more comfortable if I had to get any console only digital. I think I'd probably prefer the Xbox personally because Game Pass is such an asset, specifically on Microsoft systems. And I typically see my Blu-ray player for my Blu-ray movies as my PlayStation. So. And I like my collector's editions for my Nintendo stuff because I'm just the Nintendo loser.
Right.
But going, keeping in line with the price point, where the Xbox Series X is going to be retailing at roughly around $499.99, which is still fairly affordable for something that is promising, like the power that is promising, and having access to the Xbox Pass, as well as providing us with everything that's going to be possible within the next generation as far as, content, graphics, and whatnot. Mm-hmm. I wasn't expecting this from Microsoft. I honestly thought Microsoft would price themselves around $700. They're just, realistically speaking, when I was looking at everything that they were announcing for this system, it was very much akin to a gaming PC, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's okay.
Like a low-end gaming PC, not like a, proper, built from home. This would be like in essence a Steam machine, right? Well, Steam machines were designed to be the lowest possible entry point to PC game. Mm-hmm. I viewed the Xbox Series X as being a glorified Steam machine under the Xbox Microsoft banner, right?
I mean, that's kind of always what Xbox has been. It's been a PC, and it ran Windows that was modified to just simply run games, right?
Exactly.
Since that's always what the Xbox has been, right?
I think it depends on which one. I would argue that the original Xbox and the 360 were their own consoles in their own right. Well, but definitely since the Expo and the Expo, and I think went back to the kind of this is a PC gaming machine with. So anyway,
but I'm definitely with Nice One here. I feel like the Xbox Series X definitely costs like $700 to $800 just to make, right?
Oh yeah, probably.
So
maybe
like as far as just technical parts and GPUs and things, probably only like 600 to 500, right? But when you get into some of the custom-made proprietary stuff, probably 600 or 800 to 700. So they're definitely taking this at a loss, like considering what they're putting out and all the proprietary stuff that's going to be in it. This definitely seems like they're going to be selling it at a loss. But I also feel like charging any more than 500 is a mistake. I feel like you cannot charge 600 for this. It is not competitive. No one's going to buy it. If you have really, really good games for it, maybe. If it's the must-play game of your lifetime, I could see it. But right now, Xbox doesn't have a whole lot. Their biggest thing that they should have had was Halo at launch, which unfortunately is no longer the case. Which I'd much rather have a good Halo on release, right? But having Halo at launch was huge.
Or Gears of War.
Yeah, true. But
I mean, one of the marquee shooters day one would have been really beneficial. Aside from that, like looking at the specs, this is a powerful system, right?
Yeah.
The GPU power, 12.15 teraflops on the Xbox Series X. But then you look at the Series S, and it drops all the way down to 4. Like, that's tremendously different. And they're targeting, 4K, 60 frames per second, going up to 120 frames per second. They are definitely trying to push the boundaries of what console gamers have come to expect, right? So, in theory, all of this sounds great. And it means that the Xbox Series X will be the most powerful Xbox, period.
Yeah.
And we can't expect the games, if they can lock in some good first party support and just manage to stay on target with third party support, keep Ubisoft happy, secure whatever Grand Theft Auto game or the Red Dead games come out on the next console generation. Just appease the third parties and they'll have access to some of the best story content and some of the best graphical content that the next gen can provide.
For sure, but sorry.
Go ahead.
On the flip side, though, most third-party game developers would probably want to put their game out on as many platforms as possible. And so Xbox, in addition to also like keeping third-party, because third-party is what you're going to use to fill in the gaps of your releases, they need exclusive content, because then if you just carry third-party content, everyone's going to go to PlayStation, right?
Well, wasn't that the problem this console generation for Microsoft? Was that they had very little first-party support, and they were carried by the third-party support, and they didn't carry them very far.
Yeah, so they still need an incentive to buy an Xbox Series X or S. What that would have been was Halo Infinite, right?
Well, and then we've seen the inverse of that, too, with the Nintendo Wii U, right? Where it's like first-party support isn't enough to sustain a system all by itself either, right? So Microsoft needs to find a way to straddle the fence very properly this time out. On the flip side, though, we do know what's going on with Sony as far as its software lineup, but we know very little about its actual hardware and price point right now. Speculation is that it's going to be roughly the same price as the Xbox Series X, maybe a little bit more. But no concrete date. We will find out a little bit more at a showcase event that Sony's going to be having also on the 26th of September. So basically, Tokyo Game Show is very important this year. I typically don't watch TGS just because there's not a whole lot of like pertinent information because TGS is a developer show, right? It's not really made for a fan base. That being said, TGS is going to give us some more information about Sony. But what we do know about Sony is that while most of what Sony's offering on the PS5, at least in my opinion, hasn't fully convinced me that Sony was in dire need of a console refresh, I do think that certain games that they've announced are really pushing the graphical boundaries of any console we've ever seen. Basically, every game, like this one game, outshined everything that we've seen so far that's coming out for the Series X. That's Ratchet and Clank, right?
Yes, that is the one that looks the best by far to me. I'm so excited for Ratchet and Clank.
It's a gorgeous looking game. I wasn't a huge fan of Ratchet and Clank on the PS4. It was a good game. It just didn't necessarily appeal to me. This game looks
revolutionary.
It's gorgeous though. Ratchet and Clank this time out is mind-blowingly beautiful, and it is 100% proof of concept as to why Sony needed a console refresh.
Yeah,
like it's showcasing everything. And then what did we just have? The German game show that just happened. Did anybody watch the
I think it's Gamescom.
Gamescom, thank you. Did you guys end up watching the gameplay trailer for Ratchet and Clank during the day one event?
I believe I caught part of it.
Game just looked
like it was most of the same level we saw before, right?
Exactly. But just watching it run in real time and no load screens, which Sony has made a huge emphasis on, is that shorter load times, almost virtually non-existent load times for the PS5, right?
We saw like at some conference or something that they showcased Spider-Man PS4 running on the PS5 hardware, whatever that was at the time, right?
Yeah, and fast travel took like 2 seconds.
Yeah, it was huge. It was so massive different. Like that revolutionizes that game. And it's gotten to the point where I'm not sure if I've said this before, but I'm refusing to buy any more PS4 games that like I still have a big queue I need to buy, right? Until I just get a PS5 and I'm going to play them all reverse compatibility and hope that load times improve, because that's helped significantly.
I mean, aside from Ratchet and Clank, a lot of the other titles that have been announced, while graphically they aren't doing as much as I feel like they should be for the PS5, they are carrying the legacy of some of Sony's most recent successes. Speaking of legacy, we are going to see a spin-off / pseudo sequel to Spider-Man in Spider-Man Miles Morales. Miles Morales is very popular right now because of Into the Spider-Verse. Really did a lot for that character in general, but and then the Spider-Man on the PS4 also helped really push that character into the forefront a lot too. So having sort of a direct sequel style game to a one of the most popular selling games on the PS4 right out the gate is tremendous, right? So you're continuing the legacy of the PS4 in the style of games that we're getting here, and the same can be said for Horizon, the Horizon Zero Dawn sequel. Horizon Zero Dawn was a primary competitor for Game of the Year in 2017, getting beat out by Breath of the Wild in almost everybody's regard as far as all the major awards that came out in 2017. But Horizon was there, right? Horizon found a place. It was up there in every discussion for Game of the Year. It wasn't. So seeing a sequel to that, well, again, it's not 100% the graphical powerhouse that I think it should be on the PS5. It does carry that legacy that this is one of the biggest games we had on the PS4. We're continuing that story arc. You're going to get to re-examine these characters, right? Inevitably, it's kind of what we got with The Last of Us 2, right? Where we had a very successful game on the PS3 finish its legacy on the PS4. Now, I know there's been a lot said about The Last of Us Part 2. I particularly found it an enjoyable experience. I love the game. From start to finish, I love the game. I was even satisfied with the ending, and I know a lot of people weren't, but it is what it is. Sony is continuing its trend of just building upon its popular franchises, right? And that can carry the system, right? In a lot of ways, that's the Nintendo platform, right? That's what Nintendo typically does. We're going to ride the coattails of our previous successes by expanding the universes of these characters.
And I almost feel like, in a sense, it's also slightly anti-Nintendo, because we see that, Spider-Man, even though as a character has been very well established, the video games, specifically this series on Sony's Insomniac Spider-Man, brand new. Horizon Zero Dawn, brand new. Like, it's one thing to see beloved characters and franchises return. Like, oh, hey, I love a new Zelda, but there's always a new Zelda. Oh, I love a new Mario, but there's always a new Mario. Mm-hmm. So seeing specifically, right, Horizon Zero Dawn return and get that get expanded upon is great. Seeing Spider-Man get a sort of new entry, great. But then we also see Ratchet and Clank looking better than ever. I'd imagine that, not Uncharted, Naughty Dog's going to be doing something. And so I feel like their focus is on their new stuff. Like, yeah, Kratos will probably come back at some point. Ratchet and Clank's coming back. But hey, remember Horizon Zero Dawn? Yeah, we got that. We got Spider-Man. Whereas Nintendo's like, oh yeah, Mario. Oh yeah, Zelda. And then, you know what? We'll give you a Splatoon 2. Why not? It's
true, but it's important that's an important distinction, because a lot of what makes Sony popular, right? The franchises that give Sony notoriety, they're fixed, right? They're fixed to trilogies. Like, these characters, their stories end, right? I mean, I know they kind of pushed the button, they kind of pushed, the limits with Uncharted 4, and there's a mixed reception to Uncharted 4. But, like, that definitively ends the story of Nathan Drake, right? To the point where, like, they wanted to do more content for it, and it didn't include Nathan Drake. It included Chloe. It was about Chloe and oh shit, what's her name? The other girl. I'm so sorry, I forgot her name.
I don't remember either.
Nadine. Chloe and Nadine. Like, it gave them a story arc, similar to what Miles Morales is doing, right?
Yeah.
Same concept, where, like, we take established characters that were in the core game and we give them their own, smaller standalone.
Yeah.
Right. So it's important that Sony can find ways to carry on legacies on fixed franchises, while also giving us sequels to newly beloved, franchises like Horizon. And there's so many more games that I want to talk about, but these are the standouts right now, right? Like,
for sure,
these are the games that we're going into the PlayStation with our arms wide open.
Yeah.
So now, I also want to just say that Sony's put a huge emphasis on the fact that there's no loading screens, and that the PS5 will have a solid state drive, which will really do a lot just to kind of push that no load screen. But it also does a lot because it makes for a sturdier, faster, better system in general. And it's been, I'm surprised it's taking us this long to think that solid state drives were the way for console games to go. I mean, PC people have been singing the praises of solid state drives for years, right?
Yeah.
So it took us a long time to get to this point, but we're here now. But moving on.
Yeah.
Now that we know what the competition is doing, what Microsoft and Sony are doing, what does Nintendo do to stay relevant? How does it compete going forward? And I think the most obvious answer right off the bat is just a hardware refresh, right? Maybe, I'm not saying the Switch 2 right away, but something more in line with the PlayStation 4 Pro, right? Like a Nintendo Switch Pro system. Something that maybe that up-reses to 4K, maybe not something that is a 4K system, but something that does what the PS4 Pro does, where it, like, pushes the boundaries of 4K but doesn't truly get there. That would be nice. Something, making the Switch a little bit bulkier so that it just has more GPU power. That would be the smart way to go. Maybe just removing portability outright and having a fixed home console version of the Nintendo Switch that can just put out the raw power to compete with these newer systems, right? Because Nintendo doesn't want to completely refresh the Switch right now.
Yeah.
If they do, it's because of necessity, right? Nintendo does these things out of necessity. Why do we refresh the 3DS? Why do the 3DS get so many refreshes, right? Why do most Nintendo handhelds get refreshed, it's because the games start to push the boundaries of the system. And we're now 3 years into the Switch, and it felt like first-year games were pushing the boundaries of the system.
Yeah.
And so a console refresh for the Switch might be in order. And I know Bloomberg recently put out a report saying that Nintendo's been, talking to its third-party supporters, saying get 4K capable for us, because that's where we want to be. Now, it's Bloomberg, pretty credible, but at the same time, still completely speculative, all rumor.
Yeah.
Any other benefits that we can see from a console refresh?
I mean, not particularly from my end. I think that's, the obvious answer, because the more you can, releasing a revision allows people to double dip on the console, which is something that is always good to sell units, especially when you get an oversaturated console, which what happened to 3DS. It was oversaturated in Japan, so they created the new 3DS. But it also provides a lot of hardware benefits, faster load times, slightly better resolution, better 3D. The Switch is just an interesting dilemma where the obvious solution to a Switch Pro is you make it all docked, just like how the Switch Lite is all portable. And I feel like they should... you can't have the Switch that does both and then two that only do one. I feel like you have to, if you're going to revise it, you have to be able to have it do both.
Well, then there's the inherent problem that all console refreshes have, right? And it's the big one. Developers work for the lowest common denominator.
Yeah,
right.
And it's because they're mandated to. They're essentially told.
It has to work on the.
It has to work on the worst version of our system. It has to work. In this case, what would that be? The launch Switch. Mm-hmm. It has to work on the launch Switch. We know that the Switch Lite and the newer Switch that came out last year are more powerful, marginally more powerful, but they're more powerful. So every game that has to work on a Switch Pro, a 4K capable Switch maybe, has to work to a large degree on the base console. Mm-hmm. And that's always the problem with these hardware refreshes. I know a lot of people tend to only see the positives of this, but the negative is that look at what happened on the new 3DS. How many new 3DS games are there? I can tell you. Two.
Well, no. There's Minecraft, Xenoblade, Hyrule Warriors,
Majora's Mask. And Smash runs marginally better on the 3DS. But specifically, there are only two games that are branded works best or only for new Nintendo 3DS. There are only
Xenoblade,
two NES games and the other Fire Emblem Warriors.
It's a very limited number of games that are truly enhanced by the new 3DS. Granted, did I buy a new 3DS because it was new? Yes, I did. Also because it was much bigger, and I have fat hands, which leads to a lot of hand cramping on a handheld.
Oh, plus the original triple wafer 3DS was kind of just not cutting it anymore for me.
But yeah, we don't see a whole lot of true benefits to console refreshes. There's if we do, they're only in the beginning, right?
Mm-hmm. I think the only real console revision we should see from the Switch is something like what we already got with their current mainline revision, where it increased slightly better performance and slightly better battery, right?
Yeah.
I think that's what all you really need in this. And plus fix the Joy-Cons, right?
That's a big one.
Better than a revision almost might be a price drop. Cut it right.
I can see that.
Lite and the Switch by $50. Because you already have a very large install base. You have tons of great software. Getting the current things more accessible gives you that edge over the $5.99 whatever Xbox and Sony systems, right?
Well, yeah, Nintendo treated the Nintendo Switch Lite as their price cut. Mm-hmm. They really did. They're like, this is our budget system
again, right?
It's this is how we're gonna cut the cost of the system, mm-hmm. but it comes at the cost of the consumer, where it's you can't dock it.
Yeah.
It means you're always playing handheld, which means you can't connect to a wired internet system, which completely beneficial when you're playing online games on the Nintendo Switch. It sucks to play wirelessly on the Switch. It really does.
Yeah.
So,
but yeah, so but the Switch Lite works out perfectly for people who don't want to blow $300, and so just cutting the Switch Lite by $50 and the main Switch by $50, that's huge, especially when you're competing with these other more expensive consoles. And then a price cut with a big game like Bakugan Champions of Vestroia 2, it's a done deal. Or even better yet, Zelda Breath of the Wild 2 with a price drop and maybe a bundle pack-in deal the same day, and Mario Odyssey 2, that's enticing.
Did you guys see that weird Pro Controller bundle that they're doing? It's a Pro Controller that's bundled.
Yeah, it's the Power A ones, right?
Odyssey, no.
Oh.
A Nintendo branded Mario Odyssey Pro Controller with Mario Odyssey.
Oh.
Yeah, it'll come with a digital code for Mario Odyssey if you buy a Pro Controller. It's a weird one. Anyway, moving on, because like we said, hardware refresh was the easiest subject.
One of the things that they could do, and I don't know if the Switch has the built-in stuff required for it, but I remember back in the day, there were a few PC companies, Razer being the one that comes to mind, that were toying with the idea and playing with the technology of actually having an external GPU.
Well, that'd be
so
great.
Basically, you'd be able to take your PC or take your laptop and plug this external GPU in through a USB port, and and your games would be able to run off of it. In theory, they might be able to do something like that, just create an Uber dock for the Switch.
Dope. Well, just think of what that could do for just the overall power of the system in and of itself. Just not saying that the NVIDIA core processor that it's using isn't powerful, because it clearly is. It's beating what the Wii U was capable of, but at the same time, it's starting to become dated, right?
Right.
Yeah. So an external GPU, just the amount of boosting, what that could do for the system's graphical capabilities alone would be huge.
Yeah, but that would definitely be contingent upon a whole bunch of other different things, software-wise and hardware-wise, that I don't know if it's baked into the Switch system itself, and even if it's something that they could retroactively go back and try and add. But that is an idea of something that they could do.
At least for a hardware refresh, that would make the most sense in a hardware refresh if they want to really boost and really want to move into the 4K landscape. That would be completely refreshing for this system.
Yeah, and honestly, looking at these Xbox specs, I am a little bit incredulous as to how they're going to push 4K at 60 frames per second.
Not going to happen. Not going to happen, David. It's going to be 30 frames per second for the first.
I think so. I think so, because I'm looking at the hardware here, and while it looks good on paper, I just was looking up these other specs to modern PC parts, and honestly, it's not that impressive. It's really not.
Again, like I said, budget Steam Machine version of a PC.
Yeah,
I'm looking at the CPU.
Right?
The CPU is about probably equivalent to an AMD Ryzen 3, which is about $100. So that's not too bad. And your graphics processor on the Series X, probably it's close to somewhere between a NVIDIA 1080 and maybe a 2060. I don't know, because the 1080, in terms of teraflops, it looks like it's pushing out 8 teraflops. The 2070 has a crap ton more.
I mean, so the thing with
who knows?
It's that weird middle ground where it's the best that console gaming has ever looked, but also it's never going to be as good as PC gaming. It's like the same kind of argument you get with Pokemon. This Sword and Shield's the best Pokemon's ever looked. It still looks like an N64 game, though.
Oh, right. Yeah, I forgot my point. My point trailed off. Is with the 1080. We know from PC games that 1080 has trouble doing 4K at 60 frames per second. So I don't know how the Xbox X expects to do 4K at 60.
I mean, if it does, it's a very pleasant surprise.
I'll be impressed.
I wasn't really expecting it to. Right.
Google Stadia with all of its like, what was Google like? You get to play the games off of Google's servers. Our servers are the best in the market.
I mean,
Google
they are
Stadia,
at the same time, right?
They are, but Google Stadia can't run 4K at 60 frames per second using super PCs to fucking give us the game, right?
Right, yeah.
So, like, yeah, it is what it is. 30 frames per second, maybe 23 on like really, graphically intensive games going forward.
Right.
I mean,
that being said, to tie this back into the Nintendo and the hardware, I mean, I think that if Nintendo could try and push 4K at 30, that'd be a win.
Anyway, how many Mario games run at 60 frames per second? Almost none, right?
Right. Does Odyssey not?
I think Odyssey is still 30 frames per second.
How do you think that they might update in 3 All-Stars those 3 games to run at 60? They gotta be able to get Super Mario 64 to run at 60 frames per second, right? There's no way the game's not 60.
The only way that I could see it not being able to do it with any of those games would have to be with the way they were coded, because that's sometimes you see a thing where, because of the way the code works, right, and then trying to translate it to different systems just doesn't work. Like for some weird reason, I was streaming the other night. I decided to revisit Castlevania Circle of the Moon for the Game Boy Advance, and so I was looking into some of these Virtual Boy emulators. I mean, I own the games, but it just I don't have a modded GPA, so emulation's the only way to go. But in any case, looking it up, I was like, wait, that's interesting. The year's like 2020. Why are the bunch of these different emulators claiming that in these old ass games from like 2004, 16 years old, you'll encounter some frame rate issues? And looking into some of the dev notes where people are working at building these emulators, it's like, yeah, no, GBA games are just coded weird and they don't necessarily translate well. And so, long story short, that would be the reason, one of the potential reasons why, if these new the re-releases of the Mario can't run at 60 FPS, that would probably be one of them.
All right.
By the way, Odyssey does run at 60 frames per second, but Breath of the Wild is only 30 frames per second.
That makes sense.
Okay. Yeah. And I know that Super Mario Sunshine on the GameCube was 30 frames per second. Moving on, though, let's step away from hardware. Let's talk about some software. Mm-hmm. Another way that Nintendo could maintain its relevancy going forward in Gen 9 is just emphasis on more marquee franchises, right? We already know that there's always going to be the next Mario. There's going to be the next Zelda. But we need to start looking at the Donkey Kongs, the Kid Icaruses, the Metroid Prime, right? Like Donkey Kong, we haven't had a exclusively new Donkey Kong game since Tropical Freeze, which came out in 2013, 2014. Those games,
yeah, it's been a while.
They're very good. They do fairly well. And Retro's put their emphasis on Donkey Kong the same way Rare did, right? Yeah. But it would be nice to see Donkey Kong move to a new studio. If you don't want to complete the Returns trilogy, move it to a new studio, do something new. The way that they did with Jungle Beat on the GameCube, right? Jungle Beat is a fun game despite the fact that it has a very awkward and limiting control scheme. Mm-hmm. But I would like to see them take these core franchises and expand upon them, right? Not just that, but Metroid Prime 4. We know it's coming, so I'm less concerned about a Metroid Prime 4. But I would like to see, just expansions of these universe, right? More spin-off games to some of these core franchises, something akin to what they did with the last Metroid game, which had that weird robot soccer. I really can't remember the name of that game right now.
Blast Ball?
Yeah, Blast Ball, but I can't remember the name of the game that it came in.
Prime Forces.
Prime Forces, thank you.
Yeah, I actually
Federation Force.
Enjoyed Federation Force. I kind of enjoyed it. It's a guilty pleasure.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely not a Metroid game. Like, it should not have been a Metroid game, but it is a good, online game.
Yeah.
Like,
and to be fair, like I thought it expanded the Metroid universe, so I appreciate it for that sense. And speaking on your point,
from that though,
yeah. But speaking of your point, nice one. That would be something that I would appreciate when talking about the core franchises as well, is expanding the universe beyond just that.
Well, and we see them. They've done that with Mario better than they've done that with any other franchise, right? We've had Yoshi games since the Super NES, right?
Yeah.
The direct sequel to Super Mario World, Super Mario World 2, Yoshi's Island. We've seen Yoshi's Story, the Yoshi Yarn games, etc., etc. We've seen Kirby spin off into some weird areas where like Kirby's moved into the Yarn territory, but we've also seen Luigi.
That's sorry. I was just remembering. Remember that one game where Kirby spent the entire game as a ball?
Yes.
Canvas Curse / Rainbow Curse or Dream Course.
The DS one with the stylus.
Yeah.
Rainbow Curse. Yeah, Rainbow Curse.
Or is that one Canvas? I got the two confused.
But yeah, I mean,
that's weird.
Like, Luigi's Mansion, prime example of Nintendo spinning off of core franchises, right? Mm-hmm. Now we all know that the first Luigi's Mansion is a glorified tech demo for the GameCube, but a fun game nonetheless. That's expanded upon the Mario universe in up to this generation, right? We just had Luigi's Mansion 3, which is a fantastic game, and in a lot of ways better than Super Mario Odyssey.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually. Yeah, I think that's a good debatable point, but it's a good point.
I mean, obviously, any game console developer needs to have their big selling franchises like Mario and Zelda, and they're going to get spin-offs. But I want to say, more so than just like spin-offs, I want to see more of a push on the, I guess I call them B-team multiplayer games. Your Mario Party, as well as your Mario sports games.
Yeah, your tennis games, Mario Kart, etc.
They've been very absent on the Switch. We obviously have Mario Kart; it's a huge seller.
Mario Kart is fantastic on the Switch, though.
It's fantastic, but then where are the other Mario sports games? Like, they need to get someone else besides Camelot to them. Camelot's they're okay, but they don't have a high output one, and they're very hit or miss. Like Aces was a hit. The past couple, not so much. Like
the problem is Aces is a hit if you buy it and play it. The problem is Nintendo did a bad job marketing it.
Yeah.
Like, it's cool that you got Rafael Nadal, one of the best tennis players in the world, to market your game. But do gamers know who the fuck he is? Like, straight up. No. Do 90% of the target audience for Mario Tennis know who he is? I don't really think so.
Plus, tennis is such a niche sport relative to some of the other ones out there. Anyway,
Strikers needs to make a return.
Yes.
Yeah, but there's just a very big void right now on the Switch on sports games and Mario Party games, right? Yeah. Specifically those, sure, Camelot can make another one. Also, give them another Golden Sun while you're at it. But they can make some more and then
make it good.
Get another studio to make another Mario game. Like Square Enix has done a pretty good job of making the Mario sports games that they have. We got Hoops in the sports games.
One game, 3-on-3.
Hoops is so good, and Square Enix,
one of the low-key best games on the DS,
by far, hands down. But there's just a big void here with that, and just a higher output of those games would be huge. For the Switch, I feel like.
I bet you what they were counting on was the Olympic Games to fill that void. And then the plague hit, and,
Because those are games that Nintendo has had their finger in that pie, right? And they've been a collection of a lot of games.
Exactly. From that, Nintendo or Sega?
Sega makes it.
But even still, it's been selling on the Nintendo systems, right?
Yeah, Nintendo systems, and they're large sports collections, so you're right, yeah.
I bet you that's what they were banking on. But also, it's weird because I think the plague is kind of screwed with that a bit. But also, the plague is created.
Yeah, but the game for this season, this year of summer, 2020 in Japan, came out. So,
yeah,
it's historically inaccurate now.
Right. But I also think like right now the Plague is a perfect time to release more of those multiplayer titles because people are so kind of like starved for that, right? Like I can't go.
Animal Crossing blew the fuck up because it was something that people really wanted in this depressing antisocial time, right?
Well, and it's a way to kind of be social but not social. Not everybody can spend $2,000 to get a gaming rig with the VR headset to VR chat with their homies. You know what I mean? $300, and then $60 on a game is much more.
$20 a year. Switch on $20 a year. The whole lot.
Okay. So anyway, $400 versus $2,000, and that's if you can find an Oculus set, is still a much more accessible way to virtually hang with your homies than it is to not. And so that's one of those things where I think Nintendo is sitting on the perfect opportunity here to do this and to really make some money. But you got to strike while the iron's hot.
Exactly.
We wouldn't even mind if they just released old sports games at this point. I feel like if they went back and gave us Power Tennis, like just a port of that. Yeah, you have Aces, but who doesn't love Power Tennis? Who wouldn't love Mario Party 6 and 7? Who wouldn't love to go back and play? You were talking Strikers. What was it? Toadstool Tour was the one on GameCube, right, for golf? Like literally just port those, and everyone would be so fucking happy.
Yeah,
we didn't anticipate a pandemic to happen and for these games to be in demand, but now they are.
Right.
Yeah. A heavy emphasis on these kinds of franchises that could really quell a lot of like people's concerns that the power that the new systems are going to be providing it isn't going to be matched by the Switch. But you start adding the things, you start filling in the gaps that the other consoles aren't filling, right? So right now, when we look at the PS5, right, what are they really showcasing? Single player experiences.
Yeah,
right.
The Xbox, what do we always get whenever a new Xbox game comes out? Just online experiences, right? Far away. So like, you'll get your Halos, your Gears of War, and your other Call of Duties and whatnot, and games that don't really bring you together, but you play in a fairly decent online infrastructure.
Yeah.
Right. So the gaps that Nintendo needs to fill are those like couch co-op experiences, like the ones you were talking about, the Mario parties, the Mario sports games and whatnot. That's what they need to do in order to maintain their grip on those games, right? Because when it comes to these style of games, Nintendo pretty much the only one of these companies that maintains a strong grip on those types of those styles of games. But over the last couple of years, they've been sorely missed out on the last two console generations. Like on the Wii U and the Switch, those styles of games have been pushed to the wayside. On the Wii U, the emphasis was more single player, right? And the Switch has expanded upon more single player style games, and we don't have enough of these like couch co-op, bring people together style games. Although you see that they are developing them, it's just they're coming too far apart.
And a lot of them are coming from indie game studios too, with couch co-op. Like, I mean, perfect example of how AAA publisher developers screwed the pooch is the Crystal Chronicles Remastered. They completely got rid of couch co-op, and it's like, how is it that you release a remastered version of a game and the original is still
vastly superior?
Yeah, it's vastly superior. Like, who in their fucking right mind thought that was a good idea? I know who it was. It was a director, and he's a fucking moron for it. And he can come fly his ass over here to Japan and fight me, because that was a stupid decision. And
it really was. It actually prevented me from buying the game, and I was really anticipating it, and I did not buy it because of the removal, because I want to play that game with everyone sitting down, one screen, and re-experiencing it the way I did when I bought it in 2001.
Right. And I would have given it some slack if at the very least you could have had people come together online or even locally in like a host world, like a host hub. So like Blues could start in his world, and then we could all Link in, and sure, he might be the one to control where we go on the overworld map and all that, etc., etc. But they didn't do that. It's just kind of you can only run dungeons with people, and that prevents me from doing one of my favorite things in that game, which is gambling on cow races.
And even beyond just the infrastructure of how they set up from a gameplay perspective, it's a mess to join people in that game because they made it crossplay, but in order to accommodate that crossplay, it's so hard to get people to actually join your games.
Yeah.
But beyond that, we do see that Nintendo, I think comparing Odyssey to the previous but still upcoming Super Mario 3D Land on Wii U, soon coming to Switch, that is such a great... Mario Odyssey needed a full multiplayer mode because multiplayer in that game was phenomenal, and more 3D Mario games need to have 4-player couch co-op multiplayer. That's great. And the addition of the crown, that crown ruined lives, and it was fucking great. That. It's little things. It really is little things.
I'm that dickhead who gets you at the very end of the stage.
You're awful.
You would be. Yeah.
I'm that guy.
But what I would love to see as well, and you can't do this because the original company is gone and dead, rest in peace, Midway. But I would love to see a remaster of Gauntlet 64. That would fill my couch co-op hole in a way that hasn't been filled in a long time.
Yeah, for sure. I'm not sure if it counts as software, but I'm gonna put it in this section anyways. But Nintendo also needs to so looking at PS4 and Xbox Series X, they're very clearly established as not just game consoles, but media players and media home bases even, right? Where you have access to all your streaming and basically everything you use your TV for, you can use through these systems. Nintendo, I don't expect us to get, movies or anything playable on the Switch. That'd be stupid because it's cartridge based, I guess. But a Netflix app, still not present, right?
No.
That's okay. After Cuties, I don't want to be present.
That's fair. But
in Japan, they have a Nico player, which is a huge source of entertainment for Japan.
Nico is more equivalent to YouTube than it is Netflix. So
but my point is just that get more media integrated into Switch, more media devices, more streaming, more movies, more music, more.
We know it can be done because Hulu is fully functional.
Yeah, right. It's just that for some reason Netflix or any other real company, there's no Amazon Prime either.
Disney Plus.
Yeah, they're just not jumping on this bandwagon. We know that they're gonna Disney Plus, even being new kid on the block, will be on PS5, right? But still not on Switch, which has been out for a while. And just the improved, online, still waiting for that. Because you can't compete. Nintendo right now just cannot compete with the other two companies in their online, and that needs to be addressed.
They're purposely choosing to be behind the curve in their online. That does need to be. I should have put that in the show notes, but yes, the Nintendo has purposely chosen that because they don't want a lot of the, as they have branded it, toxicity that comes with more
online,
with a better online infrastructure. Yes, they choose this for us in a similar move to how Apple chooses what we want as our hardware. The problem is, more often than not, Apple's typically right about what we need as hardware, and Nintendo hasn't always been right about what we need as far as online infrastructure is concerned.
I feel like the most important, because hardware, I get it's a lot harder to do, but with software and online OSs and things, player's choice should always be the go-to option. If you have to pick between 1 and 2, give both.
Right.
Yeah, but they're always trying to appease the youngest gamer. In this case, for online, the lowest common denominator for online are the younger players, right? For Nintendo.
Yeah.
So they're always trying to appease to them, but it comes at the expense of its more veteran gamers.
What I would even appreciate is if Nintendo opened it up to having it dependent on each game's developer.
Yeah, that would make a lot of sense.
But they haven't opened it up that way, which I think
they tried to do that for a Call of Duty game, and I think that worked out horribly. But that's an EA problem.
Well, I know that to a degree there is some of that, not necessarily with the online infrastructure as much, but with how the little things, I guess, like Fortnite, right? Fortnite allows Bluetooth headset and voice chat without the Nintendo Switch Online app, which why doesn't Nintendo allow that? If you can do both, why not just do it the way it's intended, right? Or the little things like Pokken Tournament runs on Bandai Namco's servers rather than Nintendo's P2P, right? So, like, if you have a third-party company, you have a little bit of leeway. You can sort of modify online features to be normal, or you can run it through a better online service because Nintendo's is garbage, right?
Or Nintendo should just finally figure out a way to move away from P2P in general. Just get off of that entirely. Just move away from that system because it's antiquated. I don't know if it's easier for them, but it's antiquated. It serves no purpose in modern gaming.
Mm-hmm. I'd also maybe feel like, not for the Switch, but just for the next Nintendo console, it's probably smart to start looking into really, really good servers, because the direction that the gaming juggernauts and CEOs and people, businessmen, the investors want to take gaming is streaming. Stadia, while it's laughable now, the idea, right, is that in 1 or 2 generations, it's going to be the standard.
Yes.
So
possibly,
potentially, of course. So I feel like Nintendo's got to at least start getting a finger in that pie before they do become too late, if it happens, right? Because if it happens and Nintendo isn't up to speed there's a chance that they fall off.
The problem is that doesn't help them in the short term. I mean, that's like that would be focusing on like future generations of Nintendo platforms,
which is why I prefaced it with, like, maybe not for this Switch, but just having better online servers in general would be a great first step in that, because right now, like, if they were at least like at a moderate point, I wouldn't have as much of a worry. But the fact that they're still on P2P and that could be the shift in gaming in like 10 years doesn't bode well for Nintendo right now.
No, it doesn't.
Like,
go ahead.
They just got to dip their toe in that water at least a little bit, like now.
True that. All right, but let's move into something else. I want to stick with IP. Another way Nintendo could maintain its relevance is the curation of new IP, right? So the last 2 generations, the current one and the Wii U, Nintendo, they opened up development to the younger generation of developers. We got games like Splatoon, ARMS, and Mario Maker, all through the output of the younger Nintendo employees, right? Giving them a little bit more free reign. So the curation of new IPs in the vein of these games is really important for Nintendo going forward. Mario Maker, huge game for Nintendo, right? Splatoon, very big on the Wii U, especially in Japan, a country where online shooters are not the primary focus, right? Nintendo found a way to get the Japanese audience to partake in online shooters. Huge for them. It is one of their best-selling franchises on the Wii U and the Switch. Well, we have something like 14 million copies of Splatoon out in the world for Splatoon 2.
Something like that.
Very big install base for Splatoon 2. To the point where the game is still finished its development cycle, but still getting a lot of support, right? There was a tournament today. There was a national tournament that was broadcast live today. The game is still maintaining its popularity. On the flip side, we have ARMS, a game very much in the same vein as Splatoon, but because of its actual limited support by Nintendo, it didn't take off the same way as Splatoon 2, but it had the same potential, right? ARMS is a fantastic fighting game. Not the most in-depth fighting game, but it is a perfectly well thought out entry-level fighting game. If Nintendo had done more to push this game to be playable at big tournaments like EVO or some of the other local FGS tournaments, ARMS could have been much bigger, right?
For sure. Yeah.
Possibly.
I'm not saying it's like world breaking, but it is a new IP that initially did really well for them, and they dropped the ball on it. Yeah. The long-term goals for ARMS didn't match the potential of other fighting games. Look at Dragon Ball FighterZ, right? We're now into the third year of that game. Maintained its popularity. How did they do that? Season passes, right? Refreshing the meta regularly. A company that supports the tournament scene, right? Those three things that they did for Dragon Ball FighterZ. First off, it killed Marvel vs. Capcom, right? Arguably the biggest fighting game, period, right? Completely killed it, aside from Capcom's utter incompetence, right? First there was the incompetence, and then there was a game that did the same thing but way better. Yeah. Killed Capcom, right? Marvel vs. Capcom. Maintains its popularity to the point where it's at some Street Fighter level shit, right? Mm-hmm. It's the main stage of EVO now after Smash, right? Big game for them. Mm-hmm. Nintendo needs to put more emphasis on games like this, right? The same kind of like first they were very slow to embrace the tournament scene for Smash. Yeah. But the presence they had for ARMS, non-existent. Zero. Mm-hmm. They gave it zero chances at success. And that's because they chose to not throw a few dollars at major tournament organizers. That's all it would have taken. Here's a couple $1,000. We want this game featured, right?
For sure.
It's all it would have taken to make ARMS a little bit more popular.
I don't know if it would have worked, honestly. I think fighting game communities are really finicky, and one of the things that makes like Dragon Ball work so well is, first of all, the establishment of characters, but also arc system works. Their fighting systems are just phenomenal. They know how to balance their games. And they know how to make good fighting systems. And I mean, Blaze Blue is a perfect example of that. Like, because they're the same guys who do Blaze Blue, and you know, I don't know. Like, I want to agree with you here.
I think visually and from a balance perspective, ARMS does it better than a lot of fighting games. Yeah, I think ARMS has a very well-balanced fighting system. And visually, what they're trying to do with it, I look at the characters in ARMS, and to me, they stand out as much as Street Fighter characters.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. From a character design standpoint, like, visually, I agree with you there. I'm just saying from a fighting system standpoint, ARMS, to me, felt a lot more experimental versus Dragon Ball FighterZ, where it's just kind of like, oh, I get this. This is Arc System's update of what they did with Blaze Blue and Guilty Gear and all their other like well-established fighting systems. This is going to be.
I love ARMS, and I do think that it can stand up to those games. The problem is Nintendo treats it like a tech demo.
So my big thing with ARMS is that, specifically comparing it to Arc System Works and Dragon Ball FighterZ and all those games, is that those games, like you're saying, Jaden, are incredibly well established from people that know what they're doing. Like, these are games that are pinnacle of the best fighting game, mechanically, visually, fun-wise. Like, they're pretty much the culmination of perfect fighting games. Whereas ARMS is like the fighting game's weird cousin.
Yeah,
that's what it is. It's, if you look at any fighting game in the FGC, right, none of them look or work remotely close to ARMS.
No.
ARMS is an entirely different beast, and different is scary, right? So I feel like even if you can have ARMS, you can put money in the pot, it's going to have its fans and its players, but I feel like you can't have it in the same room and expect the guy playing Street Fighter, the guy playing Dragon Ball Fighter Z to say, yeah, ARMS looks like it's right up my alley.
I inherently disagree with that because Smash has the same kind of mechanical problems with more balance issues that ARMS has, right?
Yeah.
Has the same kind of ARMS has the same hurdles to cross that ARMS do.
Yeah.
I agree with you to an extent, but I think the reason why Smash works now is because it's been a slow burn. It's been a very slow burn. It's been 2 decades in the making, right? I think that ARMS will be able to get there eventually, maybe in the next iteration or so, but I don't think where it is right now is right.
100% agree with that. But Nintendo could kickstart that through more support, through season passes, by taking the antiquated to have expansions be separate from the core game, and it's antiquated to sequelize these games every 2 to 3 years. What should be done is the expansion of the current software to meet the demands of an advancing meta. And ARMS needs to do the same. New characters, more balance, more mechanics.
Like, I think the best way to do basically just the fighting game genre at this point, right, is to make it free to play. Because, one, it's very niche, right? But two, that direction where you almost want it to be like a games as a service, as opposed to releasing sequels and expansions separately. You just want a balance patch, right? Most games, unless you're Street Fighter, Tekken, or Smash, that are very well established as being like, yeah, I'll pay $60 for this, and they're going to receive a bit of support after launch, right? A more niche game like Skullgirls or Fantasy Strike, which has already gone free.
R.I.P. Skullgirls.
Skullgirls is going to come back. I know it. Skullgirls is great. Play Skullgirls. A like minor fighting game like Dead or Alive is like definitely not up to the caliber of Dead or Alive, but Dead or Alive is not up to the caliber of Street Fighter.
I disagree. I think Dead or Alive is a much better fighting game than Street Fighter.
It's better, but everyone's so ashamed to play it. They're not going to spend $60 on Dead or Alive.
Jiggle mechanics.
Yeah. Like, so you see Dead or Alive at your fighting game tournament. It's not going to be nearly as big as Street Fighter. It's bigger than Skullgirls, unfortunately. but
we're getting a little off. We're getting way too off the course. Well, ultimately, what I meant to say is these are the types of franchises that Nintendo needs to establish for itself, right? The Splatoons, the ARMS. We need more of these. We need more from the younger development teams, and because these ideas, they kind of seem outlandish by Nintendo, so because we've gotten so used to the core franchises, right? The Donkey Kongs, the Marios, the Zeldas, and whatnot.
And Nintendo is always like exciting.
Exactly, and these are what should. This is the PlayStation thing that we're talking about, right?
Right.
The new games carrying. Yeah, the new games carrying the newer consoles. We need more of these, right?
Yeah.
So Nintendo needs to maintain its relevancy. In order for it to maintain the relevancy, more IPs in the vein of ARMS and Splatoon.
Right. And alternatively, I think. Well, did you have more about new IPs? Because I'm going to shift this ever so slightly. If you had more about that, Liz.
No, you're good. Go ahead.
Slightly into an alternative as well. So I'll let you go first. You have the mic. You have the floor.
I was going to say what they could do is they could resurrect old IPs. Old IPs that we haven't seen for a while. Geist, perfect example. It'd be great if they could go and buy old IPs to companies that have gone under, like Eternal Darkness. Eternal Darkness 2, please, come on. We've been waiting for 10 years. 10 years plus. That would be nice.
Alternatively, bouncing off of that even further, if Nintendo doesn't want to dedicate the resources or the time to resurrecting these old platforms, and then they're going to half-ass them, they're going to be bad, right? That's what Nintendo does. Give them to people who will give them the love that they need and deserve, right?
That was the other one I was going to go with that too.
Yeah. So Nintendo should just give their IP out more and more.
Well, that kind of goes into our next topic, the experimental titles, right?
Right.
What do we get over the course of the last few on the Switch, right? We got Cadence of Hyrule.
That's what I was talking about.
We got Mario Rabbids Kingdom Battle, and we're getting this new Hyrule Warriors game that'll expand upon the canon of Breath of the Wild. Right? These experimental, titles by giving first party IP to third party developers, we start to see expansions of the IP that first off we didn't expect. Cadence of Hyrule was one of my my game of the year for 20.
That was a good game,
and no one expected it. It was so out there, an indie studio working with a Zelda IP. Yeah,
and they did such a fantastic job of it, right? Like you got all the Zelda tropes that people love in conjunction with the indie mindset that makes games like Crypt of the Necrodancer, right? Like Crypt of the Necrodancer, like Cadence of Hyrule doesn't exist without Crypt of the Necrodancer, and the popularity of Crypt of the Necrodancer allowed for an expansion of the Zelda franchise in a way that we've never seen before, and made for, first off, pretty decent story, right? Not something super in depth, but not something shallow either. And the mechanically, that game hard to master, but once you master it, you're a god in that game.
Right. And even beyond that, they don't have to go to these studios and say, make something new, like make something out of Left Wing and experimental. They could do what they do with Platinum games. Hey, we'll front the money, make us Bayonetta 2.
Yeah.
Right? Or No More Heroes.
As long as they don't touch Star Fox, I'm good.
Well, I mean, just spitballing what we already sort of know is established, right? So we could give Star Fox to Ubisoft for a game, give them the Starlink team.
Yeah, they did great.
We have Pokemon Snap. They've done with Bandai Namco, right? They're resurrecting that. Sega can get their hand back in F-Zero because they made the best F-Zero game.
That'd be good too. Yeah, easily.
Like there's options, and then like maybe make another Pokken game from Bandai Namco, or
what I would love to see them do is I'd love to see them go to Microsoft and be like, hey, if we give you guys money, could you make Banjo a sequel and have them exclusive?
Give the Cuphead team Donkey Kong.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, I could see that. Yeah, yeah.
That'd be nice. Like, and just like calling up studios and be like, hey, we know you sort of like do this thing well, do it. Like if Nintendo just made it, talk to Arc System Works and had like a Nintendo Arc System Works game, that would be pretty cool, right?
Oh my god.
Like,
I can see it.
Arc System Works. Ooh, get on that. Okay.
They've got a few, but they're super niche and digital only.
The pinnacle for me, Mario Rabbids Kingdom Battle, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
Letting Mario go to Ubisoft the way that they let him go to Square for Mario RPG, still one of the best games on the Nintendo Switch.
Mm-hmm.
It really is.
Also, going back to the sports mix games, like give the sports style stuff to people as well. Like give Square Enix Mario Hoops again, please.
Like I look at when I played Kingdom Battle, I went in here with marginally. I had expectations of the game, right? But I didn't.
I thought it was gonna be bad.
I didn't think it was gonna be terrible, but I didn't think I was gonna love it the way I did, right? And they didn't do anything new for gaming, right? They didn't reinvent the wheel. All they did was do XCOM, right?
Yeah. But sometimes that's all you need.
Exactly. All you did was XCOM, but you did it with Mario and you did it with Rabbids and you mashed it together and you got a hit, right? Still the best-selling third-party IP on the Nintendo Switch.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So these types of titles, they expand the audience. They expand the base because, first off, Nintendo's not doing an XCOM-style game themselves, but there's a market for it. There's definitely a market for XCOM. Like, we just got XCOM on the Switch recently, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So there's definitely a market for that style of game. And since Nintendo, they're not the people that are going to make it, give it to teams that are willing to make it, but give them the benefit of your first party IPs, right? Mm-hmm. That way they don't have to reestablish or establish new characters. Let them work with, the IP that's already beloved, and they won't have to work as hard to sell the game. It still has to be a good game, right? That. Mm-hmm. It boils down to the game needs to be as good as a Kingdom Battle actually was, but they don't have to work as hard to get as many feet in the door. Like the door is wide open. Come the fuck on in. That's what Nintendo needs in order to stay relevant. as far as software is concerned. We've discussed hardware, and I think the last thing we really should talk about is make or break, right? We talked about marketing earlier, right? The marketing of Mario Tennis Aces, right? Wasn't great because it doesn't really speak to the correct audience. We need more creative marketing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I grew up during like Nintendo's early marketing where it was child friendly, lots of, video game footage. Like, here's what the game looks like, but not a whole lot of not a whole lot of in-your-face marketing, which is what Sega was doing, right?
Yeah. I was actually about to go there. That's what made Sega so successful, because it was Sega does what Nintendo don't. They were edgy. It was perfectly captured the zeitgeist of the 90s, right?
And the Welcome to the Next Level campaign was also an expansion of that, getting in your face and making you aware, right? That we're here to compete. We're not here to just be here. We're here to be number one. That's what Sega did, right? Mm-hmm. And Nintendo took a back seat for a long time, and then the Play It Loud campaign happened, right?
Yeah.
Once the Play It Loud campaign happened, shit got real, right? There were a lot of creative marketing choices through the Play It Loud era that haven't been replicated. One of my favorite commercials is completely inappropriate, but do you guys remember the commercial for Conker's Bad Fur Day?
Oh, it's best.
Mm-hmm.
It is the best.
It is completely vulgar, disgusting, but I fucking knew about Conker. Couldn't wait to play it. Bad Fur Day it's a game. But yeah, we need more creative marketing choices, right? Show us the games in ways that we don't expect.
Mm-hmm.
Give us, especially these newer IP games that we're asking for, right? I want these new IPs like Splatoon and ARMS to have better marketing campaigns.
Yeah.
I don't dislike what Nintendo's doing right now, mind you, right? Where it's good-looking dad, good-looking mom, good-looking kids all playing games in the room together on the Switch, or everybody has, there'll be the dad playing docked and the son will be playing with the Nintendo Switch. I don't hate that marketing campaign, but it's year 3 now and the marketing campaign hasn't changed.
Yeah, right.
We're in need of a refresh.
Mm-hmm. And especially where I think advertisements, well, I don't know. I haven't been keeping up with advertisements that closely, but I kind of feel like advertisements are getting a little bit edgier these days. And so it'd be nice to see Nintendo kind of move in the position where going back to ads that were similar to the old Game Boy Pocket ads.
So we have a problem.
It's more fun than a weasel in your trousers or whatever.
Right. So I want to address a problem that I noticed. Weird problem. It's a stupid nitpick of mine. I watch a lot of UFC. No secret, right? I've said it a million times on this show. Why am I watching Animal Crossing commercials during UFC events? Why am I not seeing ARMS during a UFC event?
Well, that's fair.
Why am I not seeing Smash during a UFC event? Why am I seeing Animal Crossing? Your demographic, I know you're paying for the time slots. Better IP for those time slots, please.
Yeah.
And Animal Crossing commercials during fights.
And that's sort of also where I want to focus on where you are marketing, right? So I feel like Nintendo has disassociated themselves from the Xbox and the PlayStation from there's when you look at Sony and Microsoft, they're present with each other all the time, except for when Sony's just not at E3 or anywhere else. But other than that, they're always sort of in the same space. But Nintendo always feels like it's over here, specifically when we're looking at the next generation of consoles. Nintendo needs to sort of not fully go into that space, but be more present where they're present. If Microsoft is advertising the Xbox at this weird event or something that Nintendo's just not at, they need to be there. They need to make that a priority, right? If they're on a new website that Microsoft is advertising on, Nintendo needs to be advertising that website, right? Just that they need to be pushing marketing more so in the same spaces that the other two companies are pushing their marketing, as well as just, I think a big thing is who has the boldest marketing will be very important here, because while like you said, I'm not opposed to the current Switch marketing, right? It's fine. It's good. It's definitely not bold enough to make me, love it, right, or catch my attention. Like it's not a commercial.
Yeah, it's very mundane.
But you know that when Xbox and Microsoft and Sony and PlayStation are going to be marketing, they're going to be doing some bold things. Not crazy, but bolder than what Nintendo's got up their sleeves right now, right? You got to be bold. Like, not conquer vulgar, but bold, I think that's
I wouldn't mind them going back to some of the vulgar.
Yeah. I mean, no, I don't hate it either, man. Hey, man, lowest common denominator humor works.
Yeah.
There's a reason why we have 3 Hangover movies. There's a very specific reason why we have these styles of movies, right? Because they're funny and they work, right? Yeah. Dirty humor works. Fart jokes are gonna be funny until the end of time, no matter how many different ways that Mario Rabbids prove that toilet jokes are still funny.
Yeah. And to be fair, I think the Mario Rabbids, 50% of the time they're able to rather cleverly as well.
True. I'm not saying they shouldn't do it, but I'm saying they don't have to, because I know that also does conflict with Nintendo's brand image, right? At least more or less what they currently have. They can always.
In essence, that's the job of the ESRB, right? If the ESRB is performing its functions properly, Nintendo is secure and safe, knowing that they can market in these ways. Yeah. The function of the ESRB is to determine the rating of a game and who it should be marketed to. That gives Nintendo the idea of where they should be marketing it.
Mm-hmm. Right, but I also think this is where Nintendo's missing a prime opportunity in that they're missing a demographic here. Like, looking back at, again, I'm going to use the classic 90s ads, they were hitting both sides. They were hitting your kid who was afraid of getting detention and getting grounded. They were hitting like your grunge-looking teens, and they were also hitting, your salaryman that or housewife, traditional wife kind of thing who wanted to just take 10-minute break with Mario or Tetris or something, and they were hitting all those things in different ways. Yeah. And I think they're missing a big opportunity here because those of us, like myself and Nice One, who grew up with those ads, they're not appealing to us with their family-friendly ads.
For sure.
Like, they could go the edgy route and try and get us, and we'd still have enough wherewithal to be like, oh, okay, yeah, no, I grew up with Nintendo. I know that despite this edgy ad being targeted towards me, they're still going to have options for my kids. You know what I'm saying? Like, for sure. I think they're completely missing an opportunity here.
Look at the marketing for The Last of Us 2, right? The trailer was about as violent as you could possibly get for broadcast TV. More of that. Like, push the edge. Like, straddle that edge. Get as close to the edge as you can without falling off. That's what Sony did, and I think that's what Nintendo could do. I mean, obviously the games don't have to reflect the same kind of content that The Last of Us does, but you do want to show that there is a harder edge to some of these games, right? No More Heroes is going to be a timed exclusive.
Yeah.
That gives Nintendo first dibs at marketing that game.
100%. So, like, I the way I'm kind of hoping, so the big thing with marketing modern Nintendo, right, is starting with the Wii, there was zero presence of that edgy marketing campaign. It just didn't exist. Because they really, really sunk into that family-friendly vibe because they wanted the senior citizens and the kids, right? That was what they did. And it's been hard for them to climb back up from that. So on the Wii U, we saw like, we have a handful of games that are edgier, like Zombie U. Resident Evil Revelations was like a thing, even though it got ported to all the systems, I guess. I don't know. They had a couple things. And you could market those. On the Switch, like if you made a trailer of adults in a dark room playing some Astral Chain and maybe some Doom, maybe like Skyrim, maybe, I don't know, but there's definitely options. You'd have to push a lot more third-party content, maybe even just like get some Smash, because Smash is always enjoyable. Have Ridley playable, like showing Ridley and maybe a more intense stage. But just like there's options.
Does anybody even remember a trailer for a TV trailer for Astral Chains?
Not in America.
I don't think they have one.
And this is the thing. Like, Nintendo doesn't actually have to show any of their first-party games. All they have to do is present the idea that there are some mature titles, and then I think that it's kind of it's a feedback effect. The development studios, the third-party ones, will be like, okay, so they're pushing this, so therefore it's okay for us to develop more of these things like this. You know what I mean? It feed off of each other.
Mm-hmm.
True that.
But that's more or less what I was trying to get at, was just like present the idea of that it's there, because no one's going to look at Mario and Breath of the Wild and think, oh yeah, that's hardcore and edgy. So you got to market the games, but the issue is that Nintendo still doesn't have a whole lot of games that are within that boundary. So you really have to focus your third-party IP.
True that.
Yeah. And that's not a bad thing. That's honestly not a bad thing, because third-party games will make and break a system.
Yeah.
It really will.
And you see Fortnite in literally every Nintendo Switch commercial, right?
Right.
There's always Fortnite in a Switch commercial. Like, swap Fortnite with Doom every once in a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is on the Switch.
When's Doom Eternal, though? Come on, Doom Eternal.
Oh.
Last, I kind of want to talk about Nintendo. Lastly, they this goes alongside marketing. This is a marketing ploy, but we need more showcase events. And I'm not talking about Nintendo Direct, although more Nintendo Directs would be nice. Showcase events, I mean, Nintendo World Championship. When the world eventually recovers, we need more Nintendo World Championship style events.
Oh, yeah.
Places where you can completely control what the larger audience sees, right? You have these newer, the show. You have your evergreen titles that you can showcase pretty much eternally, like your Mario Karts or your Splatoons, your Mario parties, little things that you can do, or even to the extent where they've even found a way to work Mario Maker into part of their championship, World Championship Series. We need more events like this, but we also need some like smaller events too, just like getting to like more of these like airport things that they did earlier in the year before the world went to shit, where they had an airport tour where like they picked 12 airports around the world to put up Nintendo Switch stations, where they had Nintendo representatives, showcasing the Switch hardware. We need more things like this, and we need to open them up, get away from the bigger cities, right? The bigger cities already have all the advantages, like New York, California, Chicago, they get every event, right? Every tour Nintendo does, they hit those stops. I'm not saying not to hit those stops. There needs to be more.
Stop hitting those stops.
Do more. Hey.
Hey, you're at a place where you should hate New Yorkers too. So,
dude, half of Tampa is New York.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying. You're also in a position to hate New Yorkers.
But in any case, like, expand these events so that they hit smaller stages. I'm not saying you have to come to Tampa. I would like it, but you don't have to. Do something in a different Florida city, right? Any Florida city. Do Miami, right? Miami's big enough to draw your attention. Jacksonville, huge. Gainesville, College City. That city literally exists as a college town. Be more present at things like this. Go to a football game.
Oh yeah.
Be at a college football game hosting an event. Make a Mario football game to showcase at this event. I don't care what you do, but be more present. Do more showcase events and do them in places where people like to gather.
Yeah. And just being more consistent with it too, I think, is also a big thing. Because you'll see, like, they'll push their more competitive IPs like Smash Brothers. Smash Brothers, you'll see more of a presence at. And a lot of that's not through Nintendo. Like, it's local Smash scenes and whatnot. The few ones that Nintendo does do with their IP, they'll do maybe once with a specific IP. And then they'll never do that specific competition or event again. Or, they don't give the same amount of love to every IP at these events. And they also don't continue with it, if that makes the most sense. Like, have something more continuous, like, and even just like today, there's that Splatoon tournament, right? Bring more of that, but consistently, because the most we have of that is once a year.
Yeah.
Like, they stopped doing Nintendo World Championships after reviving it after like 3 years of reviving it.
Well, and keep in mind that in Japan, they do have this kind of presence, right? ARMS has a tournament series in Japan. They get an actual tournament series. Splatoon has a very big tournament series in Japan that happens kind of all year round, right? And if you watch the Splatoon or the Japanese Nintendo YouTube account, and you're willing to stay up till 3 to 4 in the morning, you can actually watch as these events begin.
Yeah.
They do these things in Japan. The presence here, the presence that they have doing the same thing globally is much more minuscule.
For sure.
And these events, first, they're fun to watch. They're fun to attend.
Mm-hmm.
And they put Nintendo in a place where there are more eyes on them, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's all you need to do. This type of marketing, it works because you put the product in the hand of the consumer.
For sure, yeah.
Super important.
Getting Switches into people's hands is the key. So, like, having that physical presence in places people gather. Like, when Nintendo 64 was just available at McDonald's to just play around. Gross, but effective. Everyone went to McDonald's. Everyone played with it a bit, right?
When Jaden and I were kids.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
If you walked into a Sears, what did they have at a Sears? They had something called World of Nintendo.
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that. Yeah.
And it was a giant... It was in the electronics section, and it was a place where they sold video games, right?
Mm-hmm.
Your Sega stuff would be off to the side away from it, but you'd have your World of Nintendo section where you could play new games through a demo station, right? Demo stations. They have these still at like Walmart, Best Buy, and whatnot, unoperable right now, but the presence that they had at Sears was big because the way Nintendo would send these stores assets, right? Like light fixtures or specific cabinets that drew your attention, and they gave you a reason to stop, look at the system, touch it, play it, make a decision.
Yeah, and specifically like in places where you're not already, where the audience won't already be, if that makes sense. So, if I'm walking into GameStop, there's always going to be a Switch demo, right?
Yeah.
If I'm in GameStop, I'm already kind of in that market, right? If I'm in the electronic sections in Walmart, I'm already in that market. But if I'm going just at my day at the airport, like they did with the airport campaign, that's great. That's perfect. You get so many people from so many different backgrounds and places, and there's a lot of downtime where they're just waiting for a flight. That's perfect, right? More of that, for sure. Mm-hmm.
So if Nintendo... To get to our closing thoughts, I'm not saying that each and every one of these ideas that we discussed is make or break, right?
Mm-hmm.
But just doing 2 or 3 of these things, maybe heavily focusing on one of these things, completely shifts the outlook of the Switch, right? Because then, despite the fact that it would be underpowered in comparison to the other consoles, you start to see this software is important enough that I need to play it. And it's only accessible on this system, right? Or this marketing is so good that, like, I don't even know what the game's about, but I definitely want to try it.
Yeah.
Right? Any one of these things could really change the outlook of how people view Nintendo. And it's not like I'm getting every notification right now. None of them are so game breaking that Nintendo 100% needs to do them. But I think if Nintendo rethinks their strategies just a little bit, they maintain their relevancy in ways that Microsoft and Sony can't even come close to emulating because they don't have the same types of appeal or the same type of IP that Nintendo has. The key to Nintendo has always been its IP. The IP that is exclusive, that cannot be played on these other systems. And a lot of what we talked about focuses on that IP.
For sure, yeah.
That is the draw.
Mm-hmm. And if Nintendo doesn't do any of these, they're going to be just fine. The Switch is still selling massively. They still have huge IP. Like, when Breath of the Wild 2 does come out, it's going to push systems. Like, so they're going to be fine, right? but giving them this little bit of a push by doing a couple of these things will definitely help, especially as we gear up for the next generation, and it give them a bit of that competitiveness to keep that momentum going forward into the next Xbox and next PlayStation.
Yeah, and it stays off the necessity for Nintendo to force a new console, like to force a Switch too, right?
Yeah.
The Super Nintendo got to live an extra year because of Donkey Kong Country.
For sure.
It allowed Nintendo extra development time to work on the Ultra 64, which ultimately became the Nintendo 64.
Yeah. If the Switch will still sell, it doesn't need a new revision, right? If it's still selling, it doesn't need it. But if no one's buying it because everything's better on the other systems, you're forced to have that revision. Yeah.
So yeah, like I said, any one of these things, if Nintendo wants to completely hardcore focus on any one of these things we discussed, huge gains for them. But if they want to, split the difference and do a few of these things really well, you'll have the same effect. Like it's not hard, and it's not something that Nintendo is unused to. They know how to do these things. They've done them before. The problem is that we've gotten away from it again, and I think that they need to just refocus their energy on these things once more. All right, but with that said, anybody else have any other thoughts on what we discussed today?
Bakugan Champions of Australia launches November 2nd. Big holiday title, don't forget.
It will be the Hollywood or holiday hit.
Yeah, I'll be streaming it day one live. Be King Blues on Twitch.tv. Wait,
right.
It's whatever. I don't care.
True that. All right, guys. Well, we already know that you can go ahead and hit me up on Twitter at nice1983. You can email me at nice1983@gmail.com. You can hit us up on Facebook, facebook.com/Nintendo PowerZone. You can email. If you like the Nintendo PowerZone podcast, you can always download new episodes on iTunes, Google Play, stream new episodes on Spotify and Stitcher Radio. But if you want to watch the video version, we're right here exclusively on YouTube, youtube.com/Nintendo PowerZone. Guys.
Yeah, you can check me out, talk all things Bakugan with me at VKingBlues on Twitter. VKingBlues. Blues is always spelled BLOOZ. I'll be streaming once again live at twitch.tv/VKingBlues. And Bakugan Battle Brawlers, let's go. Yeah.
I'm more of a Yu-Gi-Oh guy myself.
I can stream that too. Yeah, you can hit me up at Jaden Winsong. Typically, if it's Jaden Winsong, it's usually me. I have been streaming a little bit more here and there. Typically start around like 7 p.m. PST time, so feel free to drop by my channel if you feel like it. I've been doing some retro stuff, so definitely this Thursday I plan on doing some retro Castlevania titles. So if that interests you, then swing by.
All right, well, with that said, thank you guys so much for watching. We really hope you enjoyed this extra long episode. We'll try to have it out as soon as possible. Thank you guys, and remember to stay fresh. Deuces.